Hello, everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, September 22nd, and I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we're going to head over to Alan, where he's going to sit down with Andy Boyle, engineering manager at Clockwise, where they will discuss the developer burnout crisis, as well as Andy's thoughts on how engineering tools can help or hurt a developer's productivity. Alan will then also meet with Saad Malik, CTO at Spectro Cloud, where they will discuss the advantages of developing bare metal Kubernetes. We will then be airing episode 9 of Techstrong Women. In this episode, our hosts Jody, Tracy, and Rebecca are joined by Tara Hernandez, Vice President of Developer Productivity at MongoDB, as they discuss the evolution of development tools as well as the history of development tools market. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on to tell us more about some of our upcoming webinars. Next, we are airing episode 1 of our series Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. We then go over to Mitch, where he meets with Dave Wright, Chief Strategy Officer at ServiceNow, where they would discuss ServiceNow's latest Now Platform Tokyo release, designed to help organizations navigate complex business challenges amid an uncertain macro environment. We then have 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Craig Brandt, Principal Technical Marketing Manager for the Ansible Business Unit at Red Hat, as Craig explains how containers are enabling IT automation meshes to be constructed. Then Mike will interview Phil Nash, one of the original authors of the C++ test framework, as well as developer advocate at SonarSource, as Phil explains how the Carbon programming language created by Google intertwines with C++. We then go to Yalla DevOps, where Alan met with Haggai Philip Zugari, the DevOps group and tech lead at Tycol Knowledge, where the two will discuss platform engineering and the evolution of DevOps. Finally, also at Yalla DevOps, Alan sat down with Sharon Reva-Zitzman, DevRel Tech and Community CEO of RTFM Please, where they talked about the current state of developer-first companies coming out of Tel Aviv. That's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy. Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for September 22nd. First up, TikTok repeatedly declined to commit to U.S. lawmakers that the app will cut off the flow of user data to China in a recent congressional hearing. There's been a growing concern that U.S. user data could find its way to the Chinese government, and it could be used to undermine U.S. interests based on a Chinese national security law stating that companies located in China have to cooperate with data requests. While TikTok does not operate in China, its parent company ByteDance has an office there. Instead of committing to cutting off all data flows to China during the hearing, TikTok's chief operating officer said that the final agreement would satisfy all national security concerns. Next, South Korean officials have asked Interpol to issue a fugitive alert for the founder of Terraform Labs as they investigate the crash of the firm's cryptocurrency. A South Korean court has recently issued an arrest warrant for 6 people connected to Terraform Labs, including the founder, as they look into allegations of fraud and financial crimes in regards to the crash of its cryptocurrency this past May. Terra USD, its digital currency, was reported to be designed as a stable coin, pegging itself to stable assets to avoid volatile price changes. However, in May, $40 billion of value were erased from the holders of the coin. This also caused a dip in the global cryptocurrency market as well. Interpol has not yet announced the red notice, which they say may take a week to do so. While speaking of cryptocurrency, after an executive order calling on the agencies to look at ways to regulate digital assets was issued in this March, the US Treasury came back with the recommendation to explore the creation of a digital dollar. According to the Treasury, some aspects of the current payment system are too slow and too expensive, stating that the US should be prepared if a central bank currency should be determined to be of national interest. This recommendation is occurring as lawmakers have begun working on many ways to regulate cryptocurrency. Zooming out, 105 countries representing more than 95% of the global GDP are already exploring or have created a central digital currency. However, US is farther behind than most in creating one than others. Next up, the FTC has announced that it will be investigating Amazon's acquisition of iRobot. Amazon and iRobot received a regulatory filing on Tuesday, and both companies said they would cooperate with the review. After the deal was originally announced in August, groups called for the FTC to block the merger, citing that it furthered Amazon's dominance in the smart home market. Privacy advocates also voiced concerns that it would allow Amazon to get more information on its customers. This is Amazon's newest deal that is under scrutiny by regulators amidst growing concerns about its market power. Next, Apple has announced that it plans to increase the price to purchase apps from its App Store in 9 specific countries, as well as all countries that use the euro. This being said, the App Store in the US was not mentioned in these price increases. Besides the recent rising inflation, several of the major currencies of the world have fluctuated. Apple is citing both of these reasons for these recent price adjustments. On Digital CXO, we have an article arguing that software as a service will transform businesses. For decades now, service providers have relied on OSS and BSS applications for in-house infrastructure. However, these setups are no longer fit for today's world. This article highlights the capabilities of SaaS as well as some of the challenges that come along with switching to SaaS. To learn more, go to digitalcxo.com. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at a survey that reveals the severity of the cloud security challenge. Out of 400 cloud engineering and security practitioners, 80% said they experienced at least one major cloud security incident this past year, and 58% said that they believe that the risk of a cloud breach would only increase over the next year. To learn more about the results and implications of the survey, go to securityboulevard.com. Finally, on Container Journal, we have an article asking whether or not you are ready for cloud native. The world is embracing cloud native, with estimates to show 95% of all new apps will be cloud native by 2025. If you aren't already using cloud native, then you are behind. This article looks at what it means to be cloud native and what you need to be cloud native. To learn more, go to containerjournal.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I have a first-time guest on our, well, he's a person too, but he's a first-time guest on our show today. It's Andy Boyle. Andy, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. So Andy, I didn't mention your position, your company's name, or anything about you. If you don't mind, why don't you bring our audience up to speed?
Sounds good. So my name is Andy Boyle. I'm an engineering manager at Clockwise. And we are a team time management platform that uses artificial intelligence to help people make time for what matters. At a lot of places, you have like meetings sometimes throughout the day, but they may not exactly be planned as good as they could be. And so you end up having a bunch of like this weird fragmented time. So you can't actually focus on getting any work done. What Clockwise does is we actually look at your team's calendar and we will move meetings around. So your individual contributors, managers, everybody can actually have focus time to get work done.
Got it. And what about a little bit of your background, Andy? You mentioned you were an engineering manager, but let's hear a little bit about you.
Yeah, I have a very interesting background. I came into software development after working in journalism for a long time. Really? I was building software for journalistic organizations, some big news organizations. And then after a while, I kind of realized I'm actually more of a software engineer than I am a journalist. And I started running some teams. My first management job was at Axios. I was one of the first managers after the CTO. I helped build their DevOps and backend team. I've also managed teams at the Chicago Sun-Times, and I joined Clockwise about 3 months ago. And right now I'm in charge of the foundations and data teams, just kind of building DevOps, but also like developer experience tooling and that sort of stuff. So kind of a wide variety of experience.
Very cool, man. Interesting stuff. All right, let's jump in though to what we wanted to talk about today, and it's actually a topic, that I've been covering now for a number of years. I mentioned to you off camera, and that is burnout, and specifically kind of developer burnout. With over the last couple of years with COVID, a lot more people working remotely. We seem to have been hearing less about burnout because you don't have people maybe in the office from, dawn to dusk or whatever. But, I would put forth the proposition that one of the big problems we've had with all the remote workers is people don't know how to hit the off button. And so they wind up working a lot more hours than they actually did when they were going to an office every day. And, you could do that for a little bit, but like Grandma always said, you can't burn the candle on both ends. And sooner or later, it catches up.
Yeah,
that's my prompt. Take it.
Yeah, no, I've actually experienced burnout. I had something similar happen in my career where I was also working remotely. I've worked remotely for the most parts for about 8 or 9 years. And so one job, it just kind of got to be, like you said, I was just kind of always on. I was always making sure, I was always checking Slack. I was checking my email. I was just constantly looking at stuff. And at some point, it just kind of became too much. And I ended up having to be like, listen, I'm kind of broken. I have to leave because I'm going to turn into a person I don't want to be. And so I had to take a break and kind of reflect. And what that kind of taught me was, as a manager, what I try to do for those who report to me is I really push those boundaries. Or I set those boundaries. So, I expect you to work a 40-ish hour week. We shouldn't be contacting you in off hours unless there is really a high level issue. But if there's a high level issue, we already have like pager duty, like we have those sort of things set up to deal with that. So people are taking turns, and we shouldn't be having to contact folks after those 40 hours. Another big part of that is making sure that you're planning your work accordingly. So sometimes you're going to have weeks that suck. That's pretty normal in software development. You're going to have some time where we're going to have to work hard and we may need to work a little extra. But what I try to do when you have those weeks is make sure that folks understand the next week or a couple weeks after that, we're going to try to calm things down so you can sort of rest and develop, like regain some of that capacity. Because if you're redlining, if you're at 90% the entire time, you're just like an athlete. You're going to break. You're going to get injured. And in this case, it's going to be more of like a mental injury. And then this also leads to programming mistakes, poor decision making when it comes to what we should be building. And also people start to get irritable, which means you're not going to work as fast because you're not working as cohesively as a team. So it's a big issue. And I think managers need to be making sure that they are focusing on this and catching if people are responding to stuff at 9 o'clock at night. The next day, you should message them and say, hey, that's not expected of you, and you shouldn't be doing that. And then having conversations with folks who might be messaging them at 9 o'clock at night to be like, hey, don't message folks this late. That was not an emergency. And we also have specific routes when it is an emergency. So you should use that.
Agreed. I think another thing, Andy, that might be kind of bringing this to a boil is current economic conditions, right? Hey, the fact of the matter is, though there was a ton of suffering in the world over the last couple of years, in the tech world, software developers, it was fat times, right? There were people throwing money at like crazy money at developers. There weren't many developers out of work, right? And a lot of teams were probably even maybe a little bloated, right? It was a little bit, there was more hands to go around. Of course, tough times come and you start cutting heads and payrolls and costs, and companies are asking employees to do more, right? And I think that's typically or historically another period where we start seeing the burnout, cycles start picking up.
Yeah, if when those times happen and when you push employees further and further and further up toward, what I like to refer to as redlining, if you're going to do that, one of the things that you need to do is like build the capacity to be able to deal with it. And so understand you are probably going to burn out some folks if this is the way that you want to manage people. And if that is part of your way of managing folks, I don't necessarily agree with it. But if you do that, you need to make sure that you're also having a pipeline for bringing in new folks when folks eventually do get burnt out. Or you need to have some kind of method of giving them the time off they need before they hit that point. Because if you have an employee who is burnt out, it's often too late. You want to instead be aware of the signs, aware of the things that are happening before they reach that, and have some kind of intervention. And this is where I think companies that perhaps don't have as strong of a product roadmap, and they're just like, everything is the same level of importance, which is it must get done now. That also kind of leads to this, 12-hour, 14-hour work days, nonstop go, because there's a priority issue around the work that you should be doing.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So, our audience, Andy's made up of developers, obviously, but, it's probably 2/3, 1/3 single, not practitioners, but, not managers. 1/3, let's call them a managers and above. 2/3, single contributors. Let's talk now to our single contributors. What are kind of some of the, red signals, flashing signals that they should be aware of?
So one big one is it's before your workday's even started. And if you feel angry that you have to go to work, if you feel physically sick, I've experienced all these myself. If you feel depressed, like if you are having an emotional reaction to going to work, or sometimes a physical reaction, that is a key indicator that your brain is kind of telling you this is off. We are unhappy. And it's gotten to the point where we're actually having physical reactions. And that tells me you need to have a conversation with your boss about taking some time off. And it also is probably a start of a conversation around how are we working as a company? Because if you're feeling like that, there's probably others who are feeling like that. And when you start to feel like that, again, mistakes crop up, irritability, and it just starts to drain on you. And you can only work like that for so long until you break. And, I've broken. And it's sometimes this, so I like lift weights. I'm kind of like an athlete in that regard. And you're not supposed to work through the pain. It was like this bad mentality. If you had a really bad high school football coach, they told you like, play through the pain. No, that's how you actually get hurt worse. And then the recovery takes even longer. And when you are starting to feel these symptoms, that is an indicator that something is kind of starting to break. And you need to have a conversation with your manager around this. And hopefully that starts a larger conversation around what are the systemic issues that are causing this? Because odds are if you're an IC and you're starting to feel this, so are others. And they may not be speaking up about it. Or if they are, no one's listening. And so I think you need to be very open and honest with your boss and just say, this is what's happening. And I want to be a good contributor. But right now, I'm going through a rough time because of some of the systems that have been set up at this job, and also just probably some of the larger socioeconomic issues that we've kind of been discussing. Those also kind of impact you even on the job. And so communication is really important. Holding stuff in will make it worse. Talking about it with your boss, even if it feels like it's scary, odds are your boss wants you to feel okay. Your boss wants you to be feel psychologically safe, because you're going to be the most productive you can be if you are.
Sure, absolutely, man. Look, you said something before. I suppose there are organizations that say, hey, we are going to burn out people and we're just going to have a pipeline to replace them. Sounds kind of callous.
Yep.
Right? Dare I say asshole-ish, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
oh, yeah.
To do it. Excuse me. But the fact is, there are some organizations that do that, right? And that's their business model. No one, I think, out here raises their hand and says, that's the kind of place I want to work at. How do you spot those places before you already in too far down the rabbit hole?
So this is where I like to ask companies about meeting culture. And what a shocker, I work at a company that helps to fix some of these problems. But we actually did this really big benchmark report where we looked at the data that we have, 1.5 million meetings, 80,000 engineers, all this stuff. And what we found was around 11 hours or so a week, engineers spend in meetings. And then they have six and a half-ish hours. That's kind of this fragmented time. So maybe you get 20 hours of actually good focus time to do your job. I would ask when you're applying for some of these places, ask to look at a calendar of an individual contributor. If they have 6 hours of meetings a day, ask them how they're getting any work done. I've been in that position where it's just been meeting, and then they go, when are you getting work done? And I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. That's one way that you can kind of look at some of this stuff. Also asking about, all right, talk me through your PagerDuty stuff. So how does that work? And if you're understanding how are they dealing with when issues pop up, that says, oh, we have a system set in place. These people are on for a week, and then it's this person. That way, you're probably not going to be pinged every time something goes awry. I would also ask them about, what's your product roadmap look like? And if they go, oh, we don't have one, well, that's a terrifying thing to hear, because that means they're not they're not solving problems now that they know they're going to have to deal with in 6 months. You have to set some of the foundation stuff for an initiative in 6 months. So there's that problem as well. And then one of the last things, just ask them, what's your turnover rate? What's the longest serving employee here? Or what's the average amount of time that people have worked at your company? And I think that'll tell you a lot. If they are churning people left and right, there's a reason, and it's usually cultural, and you're probably not going to come in and fix that. But again, if you want to work at a place like that, because maybe they're working on some tech that you're really interested in, or it's going to look really great on a resume and you're going to be able to, live off that for a while. That's a personal decision. That's not a way I want to run a company. And that's, I'm a little old to want to work in that kind of environment. So
aren't we all?
All right. Hey, Andy, we're about out of time, but for people who want to get more information about Clockwise, maybe, where can they go?
You should go to getclockwise.com. We have free trials. We have a bunch of stuff that you can use. And honestly, it's software I use every single day as a manager, and it makes my life so much easier.
Very cool, man. Andy, come back. Keep us posted. I'd love to have you, continue the conversation. Best of luck at Clockwise, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for your time.
All righty. Bye-bye now. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back in a moment.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I've got a new company, a new first-time guest here on Techstrong TV to introduce you to. Let me introduce you to Saad Malik. Saad, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thanks for having me.
Just want to make sure I got the name right because we pay attention to that.
Yeah, it's Saad Malik, exactly right. Yeah, thank you.
Saad Malik. Okay, Saad, share with us, give us your background, your company, and some information.
Yeah, happy to. And thank you for having me on board. My name is Saad Malik. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Spectral Cloud. So we're a company founded in 2019, focusing on making Kubernetes accessible to all enterprises. As you know, Alan, Kubernetes is a very complex platform with many different moving parts. And so our goal was, how do we provide that easy button for organizations to really be able to run Kubernetes at scale? And so our unique value was taking Kubernetes and breaking it into multiple different parts, everything from the operating system, the Kubernetes layers, and the integrations, and essentially building it into a model that we call the cluster profile. And then once you have this profile, you can use it for your day one deployment into any environment. We support environments from public cloud, private clouds, data center, bare metal, edge, you name it, any environment that can exist. You can take this model and not only use it for deployment, but also for day two operations and updates afterwards.
So is that sort of a custom kube distro that you guys have?
Great question. So that's one of our core values for Spectral Cloud is not locking our users and enterprises down to specific integrations or even specific distros. Out of the box, we have support for 8 different distributions, right? You can think about everything from the CNCF vanilla distribution that we've also packaged and hardened down to using K3S, micro Kubernetes, any distro that a customer wants to bring in, they can model it in the model itself and then deploy it.
All right, very cool. Excellent. And how's that distributed?
Yeah, so we provide the deployment in 3 different options. We have a multi-tenant SaaS that we operate and run on behalf of our customers. I would say 60% of our customers are on this multi-tenant SaaS platform, but we do also offer a dedicated SaaS offering for larger customers. Somebody who's, they realize that they don't want to maintain and manage the platform, but at the same time, they don't want to be shared with other tenants. So we will operate a dedicated tenant for them. And then the last option is a self-hosted install. If you have your own Kubernetes cluster on-prem or behind your own VPC, you can install our Helm chart and get it up and running very quickly.
Very cool. And you said the company's been around since 2019, so it's about 3 years old. Venture-backed or?
Yeah, we're Series B venture-backed. We raised up to date $68.5 million. We have 20 plus different customers across healthcare, finance, retail, everywhere you can imagine. So, yeah.
Very cool. Excellent. So, Saad, well, one other thing before we jump into the meat of what I wanted to discuss with you today, and that is for people who want to get more information on Spectral Cloud, where do they go?
Best place to go is spectralcloud.com. That's I'm sure you'll spell it out below, but it'd be spectralcloud.com. Yeah.
SPE. Well, spell it out for him anyway.
It's
video.
Yeah, that's true. It's a SPECTRO cloud.com. All one word.
Excellent, man. Thank you. All right. Now that we've got all that out of the way, let's settle into what I wanted to discuss with you today, and that is the idea of kube on bare metal, right? Look, our audience is pretty sophisticated, especially around Kubernetes, cloud native, tech in general. When we talk about bare metal, we're talking about running kube directly on a server or server OS, eliminating the hypervisor layer, right? Which, for most of public cloud, the hypervisor is built in, right? You don't eliminate it. If you go to like Lambda or some of the serverless platforms in cloud, that's sort of, I guess, bare metal. But I don't know. Do you consider that bare metal a serverless Kubernetes?
To be honest, from our perspective, you don't ever realize it as an application of a Lambda function as a fast. You just run it. The infrastructure behind it, whether it's bare metal, container running on a VM, we have no idea. Would I consider it bare metal? I probably would assume for efficiencies, they are running bare metal containers directly on it. So,
yeah. See, and maybe I'm old, right? But when you tell me it's running on bare metal, I'm assuming it's running on a physical server that I can see, touch, rack mount, or what have you, right? Not, even in serverless, I still see this, farm of hardware that runs like some amorphous sort of serverless cloud, if you will. So it doesn't, to me, that's not bare metal, but I'm weird like that. So.
Yeah, I see. I see. For yours, it's like a bare metal is a physical box versus a cloud. A bare metal cloud is something that is able to operate tens of thousands of servers that are able to maybe even orchestrate different functions that are being executed simultaneously. So, right. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Yeah, makes sense.
Yep. So, when I first was introduced to the idea of Kube on bare metal side, I thought to myself, well, I guess this is for people who will never go to the cloud. Why? I mean, nice little sub-niche corner case kind of thing. I wouldn't build a big company around it.
Yeah.
But, we've seen that I don't want to say a majority because it's nowhere near a majority, but a decent subset of Kubernetes deployments are being done on bare metal.
Absolutely.
Why?
I mean, and to be honest, Alan, I think if we were to go back even 20 years, applications used to run on bare metal, right? That was the only way. This is before even virtualization, right? But one of the biggest challenges applications had before on bare metal was there was no easy solution for resource isolation. So if you had multiple applications running on the same bare metal server itself, what would happen is that due to one noisy application, it could completely take over all the resources of the other applications and completely starve them. And on the flip side, what people used to do was they would have dedicated bare metals in the boxes that you were talking about per application. But then on average, majority of the bare metal servers were completely underutilized. They were not even in use. Obviously, virtualization came in and swept the world and was able to provide better utilization of your underlying servers and improve scalability of everything. But at the same time, as you know, there was less performance, there was more overhead of management, of cost, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think the last 5 years, the big wave that's been coming is digitalization of moving applications to containers, right? Microservices. And I think now these cloud native applications that can run on VMs, on containers, on side of anywhere, do you really need that hypervisor layer? And the answer is no, because now you can get the same abilities and benefits of running these applications on a bare metal box and also guarantee that your application has certain resource constraints and is not able to affect other applications. I think that's one of the main reasons we're seeing this, especially now.
Saad, I remember when Docker and containers kind of first burst on the scene. I guess it was 6, 7, 8 years ago, maybe something like that. And one of the questions then was, do you need a hypervisor to run Kubernetes? And clearly, then and now the answer is no.
No.
But the issue came up of server density. Right? That was one of the big advantages of the cloud, was the density that levels you could achieve. You talk about applications running on a computer. One of the companies I helped put together back in the .com days was called Interliant. We were an early application service provider, hosting Lotus Notes, PeopleSoft, Gloss, and a bunch of old enterprise apps before there was cloud, before there was really big hypervisors, and that's exactly how we did it. Now all of a sudden the hypervisor came, and your server density and your application density, your data density, went through the roof, right? Like a vertical climb. The idea behind containers and then Kubernetes was that was even going to be more dense than the hypervisor. But a lot of people said it was like multiplication. You take the density that a hypervisor environment allows you, and then running containers in Kubernetes. Some people said, well, it was exponentially more dense to be able to do that. Other people said it was like two negative numbers making a positive, or vice versa, that you would lose some of the density of Kubernetes by running it on the of containers by running it on the hypervisor. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think today about how enterprises run workloads, you can go to every single organization in the world and they will have a vSphere deployment, or they've already moved to the cloud, right? But I would say legacy enterprises all are running vSphere. When containers and Kubernetes first came out, it was so much easier being able to say, I want to go ahead and run my actual Kubernetes clusters. I'm experimenting on my existing infrastructure, as opposed to talking to my IT teams like I used to be and having a 6-month ticket before I'm able to secure servers and et cetera. I think obviously it was still, because of containers and how they're able to bring applications with lightweight operating systems, they're able to get a lot more utilization out of it. It probably canceled out some of the overhead of running a hypervisor. And from my perspective, and I'm sure Alan, you can chime in here, there is at least a 7 to 10% tax on the CPU, right, on memory. You don't have guaranteed IOPS when it comes to your actual storage disk itself. Even your network throughput, depending on what your other workloads are running into your vSwitches, are also being affected. If you're going down to the bare bones of a bare metal server, you have guaranteed all the resources of the bare metal systems are dedicated to your one app or your multiple apps that are running on it. So there are obviously some benefits of the actual containerization that go into and merge in with the vSphere layer. And I think that probably would cancel out. But this day and age, when Kubernetes already provides amazing abstractions for your compute, for your storage, for your networking, I think it just makes sense if you are able to run Kube on bare metal, and then you also gain additional benefits. It becomes a multiplier benefit of running on bare metal and having your cloud native applications being run.
So I guess this raises the question to me, who's going to tell the cloud providers this?
It's interesting that many of the cloud providers now, they're also providing bare metal servers, right? I don't know if you noticed, but I tried provisioning one of those bare metal servers. It was $700 like for a day. It was very, very expensive. So I think...
Well, because it's not their model, right? It's really, it goes against their whole scalability kind of formulas.
Yeah, it is. And one thing I'm just, Alan, also considering is, as Kubernetes becomes the critical business infrastructure where every app will start moving towards Kubernetes, already the big cloud providers for the past 3 years are providing managed Kubernetes. But the managed Kubernetes is, of course, running a VMs worker nodes that you manage. More and more, we're seeing pushes towards Cloud Run. We're seeing pushes towards Fargate on Amazon, where you're just defining, here's my application, you run it. Potentially, I can see, as we move farther into this landscape, that even the cloud providers would make it easy for you to run containerized app, but they would run on physical bare metal systems and not have any virtualization tax in the middle. So,
Well, it certainly will be interesting. Now, to make clear from what and I don't pretend to be an expert in Spectre Cloud, I'm just going by what you told me. You guys offer a hosted Kubernetes. You want to call it managed Kubernetes. Is that on bare metal?
So our solution is about providing a platform so that organizations can run their own Kubernetes. So in our case, if you're provisioning a cluster on public cloud, you would add your cloud account credentials, and then we would essentially provision a cluster in your cloud account. Now, you have an option. Do you want to deploy the managed Kubernetes like EKS, GKE, or AKS? Or do you want us to provision on VMs, right, the traditional mechanism? And when you pick the traditional mechanism, you can deploy our version of Palette Kubernetes distro, or you can run K3S or Micro Kubernetes. So you have the option. But it's always running in your environment, whether it's your public cloud environment or your data center or your edge bare metal.
With your customers and what you've seen in the field, what percentage of people would you say or organizations are running bare metal versus on hypervisor stuff?
It's a great question. I think over the last year, we're starting seeing a lot more push towards bare metal. Traditionally, it's always been, I would say, 60, 70% on public cloud. The rest was going to be on vSphere or OpenStack. We have a couple of customers in OpenStack. But now we are seeing dedicated bare metal environments in data centers that are running just Kubernetes on bare metal. The other push that we're also seeing is the new edge initiatives. Right? Edge, of course, is about having smaller either micro data centers or in some cases for retail and restaurants, just 1 or 3 small Intel Nuke boxes. There, the overhead of running a hypervisor is just completely not something in the equation. And so being able to run Kubernetes there has to be run natively on bare metal. So.
I agree. Do you think that that's a trend that we'll see accelerate, or?
I believe so, because if you think about like how all today the number, even though me and you, Alan, talk about containers is here, everyone talks about it, we breathe it, but in the enterprise, containers are only 15% adoption in production. That really? Number will increase to 25% by 2025. So it's very fast, linearly growing. But because of that, I do think that all new apps that are becoming containerized or being retrofitted to be containerized, they should all run on Kubernetes. And because of the values of running on bare metal, as long as the management layer is easy, I think we'll see a lot more bare metal adoption too.
When do you think you reach that sort of critical mass inflection point where that becomes the preferred standard model?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So obviously right now, large enterprises that still are using virtualization, they're using all these different services that clouds provide. And then of course they have Kubernetes that today runs in virtual environments in cloud or on vSphere on premise. I do think that as I'm assuming 70, 80% of the applications have become containerized, they run native with the actual integrations Kubernetes provides, that more and more companies are going to say, hey, why are we investing more and more onto a hypervisor layer when that has additional cost, when it has additional support and training needed, when we really don't need it? I think at that point in time, we'll see a majority of organizations move towards completely running bare metal, whether it's on premise or they're leveraging the cloud bare metal, potentially using some higher level service that we talked about. Yep.
Really interesting. Of course, one would say, why would someone pay $61 billion for a hypervisor company? Not mentioning names. But anyway, hey, Saad, we're about out of time. This was a fascinating conversation. I'd love for you to continue this conversation with our audience, because it is a topic that we've hit, whether it's on DevOps.com or on our Container Journal site. You know, it's something that we keep circling around, which is this whole thing. You know, our basic belief here is that Kubernetes represents the heart of a new compute stack, a cloud native stack, right? And as this becomes the more dominant stack, we're going to see, it's inevitable. You're going to see more and more of it. So anyway, thanks for coming on. SpectroCloud.com?
SpectroCloud.com.
All righty. Hope to have you back soon. Keep up the great work, man.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, team.
All righty. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Techstrong Women, where we feature amazing women doing amazing things in tech. I'm Jody Ashley, executive producer here at Techstrong, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Tracy Reagan and Rebecca August. But before we introduce today's guest, I want to give you a quick update on what's happening here at Techstrong. Coming up on October 4th, we have our Cloud Container Security Summit. If you're interested in attending, or even better, speaking at the event, please go to techstrongevents.com to sign up, and be sure to tune in to techstrong.tv every day for great shows and interviews. Hey, Rebecca, what do you have on tap for this week?
Sure. Nope. So my biggest thing with this week, my greatest find was a cybersecurity girl or cybersecurity_girl on Instagram. She was giving out great tips on how to tell if your data has been compromised. So I really loved how she's been spreading great information about cybersecurity and also bringing in like droves and droves of crowds of people just saying thank you for all the information that she's been sharing lately, and hoping to have her on the show with us pretty soon here.
All right, that's amazing. Trace, what's your news for the week?
Well, Rebecca, what is her name? I want to watch. Yes. What is her name?
Her name is Caitlin, but on Instagram, you find her as cybersecurity_girl. And
You got it. I'm going to check her out because cybersecurity is awful. It's a pretty big conversation right now. Finally, we are having that conversation. So I've been watching the news lately, and the Linux Foundation has been kind of busy with creating new foundations. Two came across. One is called PyTorch, and it is being donated by Meta, which aka Facebook. And it is similar to TensorFlow for basically managing workflows around machine learning. That's the best way to describe it. I find it pretty fascinating that the PyTorch itself is going to have a complete foundation. It should be an interesting one to watch. There are, I think, Google and Microsoft as well are part of that foundation. And the goal is to start making AI easier to program. TensorFlow already has done that. Apparently, PyTorch is a little different in that it is more specific to Python programmers, so making it easier for Python programmers. The other thing that came up, which I think is totally fascinating, is the Linux Foundation started another foundation around a wallet. So they have created basically a foundation for managing what they call the Open Wallet Foundation. They're not going to be creating a blockchain themselves, but they want to build a blockchain ecosystem through access to open source technology. This one, I think, is the one to watch. I have just recently started getting into the fun of blockchain. It's always fun to learn new things. That's kind of what I'm doing right now. I just went to a blockchain conference last week and my brain was really full after the first half a day. But the idea of these open source tools around an open wallet, I find pretty fascinating because as I learned, even though we have a blockchain technology, there is quite a bit of work to be done around supporting that blockchain technology, particularly around programming in it. And the Ortelius project, which is part of the CD Foundation, received a grant to build out an immutable SBOM using blockchain technology, which is how I ended up at this conference. So those are the two things to watch, the PyTorch, as well as the Open Wallet Foundation through the Linux Foundation. So those are my tips.
They've got a lot going on over there. They're relaunching the CDF as well, the continuous delivery. We're actually going to be doing a show with them that I'm getting ready to launch. So they're so busy over there for sure.
Which is where I met Tara.
Is that
great?
Yeah, we're excited to be part of their relaunch. So I'm excited to get that show started for them. So we like to partner with them. They're a great team over there. Well, speaking of Tara, I'd like to introduce Tara Hernandez. She's our guest today. Tara, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, hi. Thanks for having me on the show. So as you said, my name is Tara Hernandez. I am currently the Vice President of Developer Productivity at MongoDB. That's relatively recent. Previously, I was at Google and a swath of other companies. Been around almost 30 years now in the industry, and it's been really wild to see how it's evolved, particularly in my space. Coming in, my first job was at a company called Borland International, which did compilers and databases back in the day. I think it was I started there in 1993, something like that. And I got a job in something I had never heard of, which is build engineering or release engineering. And I found my true passion, which is development infrastructure. So I've written a lot of make files and written a lot of Perl and Python and other types of scripts and developed tools. While I was at Netscape, I helped develop an early continuous integration system called Tinderbox that we open sourced as part of Mozilla.org. We also open sourced a web-based bug tracking system, which I think was first examples of web-based developer tooling out into the wild. And that was in 1998, I think. I've worked at a variety of different companies with a primary focus around development infrastructure. I was at Pixar Studios, helping a lot of their software is proprietary, so helping develop good development software development best practices in support of the movies that are being developed. It's all CG animation. Did a stint at Google where I was not doing development infrastructure, and it was an opportunity to kind of test out being more product aware and trying new roles. And I learned a ton. And one of the things I learned was I really love development infrastructure. So here I am at MongoDB, back to where I belong. And one of the cool things about MongoDB is it has an open source CI system called Evergreen, which was custom built in order to support database development. So MongoDB is the corporation that wraps around MongoDB, the open source NoSQL database. So the development infrastructure around how do you develop that in a highly scalable way is an interesting technical challenge. And that's what I'm working on right now. And as Tracy mentioned, it was one of the, while I was at Google, I was privileged to be part of the founding of the Continuous Delivery Foundation. And it's an organization I am very pleased to be part of. And getting to meet Tracy was certainly one of the benefits.
Well, thank you. And that is a fascinating topic, CI around databases.
Yeah.
How long have we had that conversation? It's like, why is the database never part of the CI workflow? How did that get left behind? Because half the time you can't do a deployment if you can't track the database changes as well. So I had never heard of that. So I'm super glad to have heard that today, because it makes me very excited. Doesn't take much. I'm easily amused, but that is really cool.
Yeah. It's you can go to GitHub and look for Evergreen, and it's not part of the CDF yet, but who knows?
I was just going to ask that question. Do you think you guys could contribute that to the CD Foundation?
We should have that conversation at some point.
We definitely should have that conversation. I am so open to that. So Tara, let's just to get this party really started. Tell us what you're seeing, kind of where you're at, where your headspace is at right now. What are some of the challenges you're seeing, and what are some of the pivots that you're starting to see in the space, in your area of expertise?
So, that's a great question. Like I said, I got into development infrastructure of some form all the way back to the 90s. And at the time, it was the thing that was like, oh, well, that's what you do when you're not a real engineer, right? So you're just the build monkey or whatever it is. True story. When we released things like Tinderbox and Bugzilla as part of Mozilla.org, we hired this guy by the name of Paul Bigger, who was the Tinderbox maintainer for Mozilla at the time. And he looked at it at Tinderbox and he was like, wow, this is kind of a cool idea, but oh my God, that's a terrible code base, which is true. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what I'm sure he was thinking when he looked at this Perl CGI with inline HTML. I mean, it was a truly horrific implementation. But he then turned around and founded Circle CI, right? Because he actually was an entrepreneur, had an entrepreneur spirit, and recognized that there was a value proposition in developer tools. And since then, you look around and you see companies, Kosuke, invented Hudson, then Jenkins, and now there's CloudBees. And there's Circle CI, and there was I think Travis CI, sorry. GitHub, right? It's when DVCS became a thing, or GitLab, and now developer tools is actually real engineering. First of all, it finally has the respect it deserves, because shipping software is actually really hard, and it takes a lot to do it properly. And then you had coming out sort of what does it mean to successfully ship software? And you had things coming out like DevOps, and to me, more importantly, the State of DevOps report. And then, of course, Nicole and Jean and Jez wrote Accelerate to really talk about that and the research. And then that evolved into, more recently, Nicole and her team had the SPACE framework for developer productivity. And so now developer productivity is the new hotness. And you see companies like Code Climate or GitDX or, and various Haystack. There's now dozens of companies that are emerging solely to solve the problem of how do you do developer productivity as efficiently as possible, right? And so we've kind of come all the way around to it being this thing that was like, that's just details, right? It's not that important, to this is one of the hottest areas of the industry from a technical standpoint, because we have gone also from 18-month, 24-month release cycles to continuous deployments where you could go out per commit potentially, if you're super aggressive about your hosted SaaS platform. And I think it's just the speed of which this area has evolved is just tremendous. And it seems like every time I turn around, there's some new thing that somebody's trying, right? Mm-hmm. And developer stack has had an enormous impact on the industry as a whole. The Linux Foundation exists because companies realized that using operating systems as a mechanism to sell hardware was not a good long-term strategy. Okay, let's all decide that Linux is actually in the Unix space the way to go, and let's all collectively agree to fund, Linus Torvalds and his team to maintain it. That was like a really interesting sort of milestone. And then as you evolve, then you have, oh, well, here's this container thing that this company Docker has encapsulated and tried to create better abstractions for. It was always there, but it wasn't very accessible. Let's make it more accessible. Oh, well, now how do you do that at scale? And you had companies like Mesosphere giving it a try, but that was a little bit too much overhead. And then Google released Kubernetes. And of course, when Kubernetes first came out, it wasn't super usable, but then eventually they realized, hey, there's something there. Hey, let's use this model with the Linux Foundation to really try to create an industry standard. Okay, now we have the CNCF. And that spawned, a wealth. And you look at the CNCF landscape, there's like thousands of elements. And this is all based on not necessarily what we think of when we think of high-tech industry is providing, business solutions or consumer solutions, but it's really around just how do we provide the solutions as a process, right? And so that's, I think, the thing that really gets me excited, that this thing that I love and find the most interesting is so critical now to how we think as an industry. It's not the end game, it's the process of how we get to the end game.
Productivity is such an important part of what we're doing when it comes to what you're talking about, developer tooling, the pipeline. Some years back when I was really pushing our Meister product through OpenMake software, which generated build control files instead of coding a make file, I had one developer tell me, but this is a craft like cobbling shoes. There has to be a perfect make file. And my response to him was, but I don't want just one pair of shoes a quarter. I want lots of shoes. And I think that has been a challenge for us. And I think it's going to continue to be as we go into cloud native. What do you see, especially around the database problem? Because, we're going to get distributed databases now. And I mean, really decomposed database, a database per container. How is that going to be solved? Are you guys thinking about that, or have you put your head around it and how that's going to be changing and making this productivity model more difficult?
That's a great question. And let me just, caveat this with, I am not a database person, though I now work at a database company. So I'm learning, and NoSQL was something I hadn't really poked at all. But, if you look at things like sharding, and NoSQL itself, and then also the evolutions of the different ways of, the creation of Aurora or Spanner, as this highly scalable solutions. There's a lot of different approaches to it, and I don't know that there is a one size fits all for all business cases as a possibility, because when it gets down to the end of it, you have to think about what are kind of the key elements you want to be able to support: correctness, scalability, and latency, right? And regardless of whether you're using something like Spanner or you're using something like SQLite, that you're trying to pick a solution that's going to dial in those three things the most usefully to your immediate business need. But one could argue that data store is in a sort of a weird way is sort of like infrastructure. There was that, well, it's, you got a DBA, right? And, or maybe you've got some software developers who kind of have a decent understanding of, but it should just work, right? Let's, the main thing is the app, right? It's the app, it's the user experience. And not all companies historically maybe invested as much as they needed to or should have been in optimizing databases. Now, part of that could be that you were either like an Oracle or what was some of the other Oracle competitors, Sybase. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're gonna go all in with Larry, and we're going to hire a DBA. And oh my gosh, aren't those Oracle DBAs expensive? And
yes, they were.
Still are probably. But and so maybe there was also then a reaction against that, like we don't want to be tied to Oracle, and maybe we can all just be good enough with the MySQL DBs because those are free and it's just cost of maintenance. And I will admit that, knowing almost nothing, have acted as a MySQL DB admin and going in and manually had a calendar event once a month where I would log in and I'd rotate the bin files for the backups, right? Because I didn't really know what I was doing. And I think a lot of companies really haven't appreciated the level of investment that you need to have around data management, which is ironic because data management, I mean, without your data, you don't have a business, right? And it's a really critical detail. Maybe it's not as interesting and it's harder to talk about than some cool new user-facing thing that you can demo. I remember at reInvent back in, 2017, and they were talking about Aurora, and Werner was up there and demoing it. And I'm like, this is the most boring demo ever because we're looking at a terminal file that 20,000 people are staring at. And I'm like, I can appreciate something in terminal, but it's not very compelling, right? So I don't know, it's interesting. And like I said, I'm almost purely focused on the development infrastructure for MongoDB, but I will say that one of the cool things about Evergreen, for example, is it's dog fooding. So we've got MongoDB in the back end, a couple of them for various parts of it. And, one of the really interesting things about a CI system is that if it's successful, people start wanting to use it more and more, and you have a scalability issue. Right. And so it's not just your compute scalability, it's also your data scalability. And so I have been learning a lot. I've been there about 3 months. I've been learning a lot about some of the really fascinating scale challenges that we've had as a business around supporting database development and how to ensure that the quality, once it hits our customers, has been vetted as much as possible. It's a fascinating problem.
Tara, I have to ask you, you were so passionate about your whole career. I mean, what got you as a young person excited about this kind of thing back in the 90s, right?
This isn't a secret, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily know this. I was not meant to be in computer science. I was a computer science major at UC Santa Cruz, not by choice. I had gone to university intending to be a history literature double major. I'm a humanities person. But my parents were like, you got to do a STEM major, or we're not going to pay for it. I'm like, oh.
Wow.
That's
so
great.
I didn't think so at the time. And I'm still not completely convinced.
I'm completely convinced. I don't know.
Well, I barely graduated. I was a terrible student. It was really hard for me to get engaged. It wasn't something I was super passionate about. And so one of the things I love about development infrastructure actually is, again, not having heard of it. Some friends of mine at UC Santa Cruz at the time, most students got internships either at Borland, which was just up the road in Scotts Valley, or at another company called SCO, or Santa Cruz Operations, which back then was actually an operating system company. Later, some people might know it turned into a patent troll litigator, which was a terrible end to what started out as an auspicious company. But everybody wanted to go to SCO because SCO had the hot tub. Oh. It was a converted beach house in Santa Cruz. But I ended up at Borland, and I ended up on the team that I was in, which was the build team on the languages division, because I had some classmates of mine who were like, hey, we got an internship opening up, come try it out. And that was, running the builds, making the golden master floppies. I don't know if you can see it. I've got some first ship boxes back there for Borland C++ 4.0. It weighs like 30 pounds. It has 50 3.5-inch floppies and 80 5.25-inch
master floppy. That's something
and,
we haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, and it has physical paper books because this is pre-internet. right? So
Wow.
the box is huge. It weighs a ton. And so it's like, figuring out how do we make this better, and started to do tools development. And then when Borland, I don't think this it's 30 years old, so this isn't a secret either, but the Windows 95 developer SDK went out with a Borland compiler. Because at the time the Windows compiler was just garbage. And that led to angst and acrimony within Microsoft, because the compilers and people in Microsoft were like, what the hell? So anyway, Microsoft came in and basically hired out the Borland languages team, including sending ridiculous offer letters by limo to the headquarters to like Anders Heilberg, who at the time was the author of the Pascal compiler at Borland. And he went to Microsoft and was, created ActiveX or DirectX, I don't know, critical technology. So that was all Borland people. Like Microsoft became the compiler powerhouse because of all Borland people, which also was the first lawsuit I was aware of about companies suing Microsoft for unfair practices. And then after that, I went to Netscape because a bunch of Borland people went to Netscape. And Netscape went from, Borland was a very well-established, more traditional company, the 18-month to 24-month development life cycles, heavy QA investment, very slow and staid. It was a great place to learn. And then you go to Netscape, which is the beginning of the internet era. It's madness and mayhem and Coke can towers and, people not going home or bathing, the whole like startup lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big time. I mean, I remember just the computers that I worked on, the very first like TRS-80, the trash 80s, that Radio Shack, and being like, "Ooh, it's a computer."
Yeah, well, I was working on ADM3As and VT100s at school, and then I had a Mac SE that was my personal computer. You couldn't do that much with, didn't even have a terminal. So I'm at Borland and like, okay, I don't really know anything about anything. And I know that I'm not really interested in application development. It just doesn't interest me, but oh, okay. I have people who are like on the cubes in either side of me, and they have problems and I can help solve their problems, like their immediate problems. So there was that instant gratification nature of, oh, this is broken. Why is this broken? Okay, let me help you figure it out. Okay, I can write a little tool that will like prevent that in the future, or that will help us debug it in the future. And it kind of expanded from there, and a lot of my classmates ended up there as well. And, so this familiarity of a team of like, nobody knows what the rules are, so we're just going to make them up. Right. The first version of Tinderbox, for example. So again, this is it's meant to pull from a CVS repository. So this is pre-Git. And it would pull it to a local machine with a Perl script. It would, and also, by the way, the CVS repository was on a Unix platform, and we had Mac and Windows. We had to run software to emulate the file systems on Mac and Windows to pretend to be Unix systems so we could run the CVS commands, right? So that was a whole thing. I mean, this is like really primitive. So we have these, actually, in the first clients, it was Perl on the Unix platforms, but it was Bash scripts on Windows because we didn't have anything else that we could use at the time. And it was AppleScript on the Macs. And this is the 68K PowerPC days, right? And so everybody had little custom scripts, and it would pull the CVS repository, execute the build command, and then send a little text to the mail server, which would then grab that incoming mail, parse the text, and then append it to an HTML file that you could then look at with a browser. So the first continuous integration, web-based continuous integration system was basically rows of text in reverse chronological order with either red or green.
Wow.
Right. And that's,
but Tara, even though what you just described isn't terribly far from what a lot of companies are still doing. That is the scary part. We still have such a long way to go to mature our DevOps pipeline.
But here's kind of the thing that really cemented me as a tools person. So this guy, Lloyd Tabb, who went on to, most recently, he founded Looker, if you're familiar with that company, and they were acquired by Google a couple of years ago. So they were doing data visualizations. But he was one of the authors of early HTML, right? He invented HTML tables, he and Jack Paulus and a couple of other folks. So he came over and he's like, all right, so here we have this, like this incoming text. And he had just invented tables in the browser. And so he wrote, the file was called lloyd.cgi. That would
of course it is.
Right? And it was, in his honor, and gosh, and God bless him for this. And it created a table that had commits over time by operating systems, and then would also do the offsets. Now, an HTML offset at the time, there was no CSS, nothing, right? That was really hard to do, but then we could see for each column, there's the check-in. Okay, these 15 operating systems started failing after that commit. Okay, what the hell happened with that commit? And that was like, whoa, like that's something that's so cool. I mean, I'm working on the browser team. Like I'm shipping the browser, the Netscape Navigator, like the beginning of the internet era. And the thing that we did with Tinderbox was so much more exciting to me than just, oh, the browser. Okay, that's fine. Like I had no interest in working on that, but this is cool. Right. And then just from there, everything went mad. Bugzilla is still being used to this day, which is just fascinating to me.
Hey, some of these tools are very, very sticky once they get in there. And that is part of the problem with being able to evolve the pipeline, is that some of these tools get super, super sticky. I mean, Rebecca brought up the cybersecurity discussion with her influencer. Yeah. And one of the big problems that I continue to see companies have is we have such static DevOps workflows. Regardless of what tool you're using, they're pretty static. If you don't have the generation of the SBOM in there, you're going to have to go revisit a lot of workflows. And that's why I'm so excited about the CD events from the CD Foundation, because everything that you've been talking about, if we can build it through an event base, like through cloud events, boy, does it sure allow us not to be so invested and so sticky, so we can actually pivot, because it's not been something we've been able to do well. We do not pivot well on the DevOps side. Everything we do is so scripted.
Yeah, and everybody thinks that the snowflakes are required, and they're really not. They don't have to be. They're not. Right. And I think, beyond even cloud events, I point a lot at what OpenTelemetry is doing on the other side, on the logging side, right? And enabling things like observability, but also, enabling a investment for Prometheus and all these other tools, Honeycomb, to have standards that de-stickify. But also, it's not just a matter of not de-stickifying, but also enabling broader and more robust integrations. Because if you have this common layer, right? And what does that open up? And so we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. But I think this is probably one of the hardest challenges of development infrastructure, is overcoming that need to. But my use case is unique among millions of use cases. Like, well, actually, it really isn't.
It's not. It's really not. And when it comes to an event plane, you have a payload. You're passing a payload off, and that's really all it boils down to, is just passing a payload off through that event plane. So hopefully we'll get there, because we have been preaching agile development for I don't know how long, but our DevOps is certainly not agile whatsoever.
Well, there's an ironic thing there. It's, I give talks about this. I gave one at CTO Summit called Angst Aikido. It's like the art of influencing culture change with development organizations. Rule number one is engineers hate change, right? Even if they have a bad system. Even if they have a bad system,
absolutely hate change. What is that? They're change agents themselves, but they don't like change.
Exactly. It's like even a bad system, they're familiar with it, they know how to work with it, and they feel efficient, right? And so I think that was things the State of DevOps report and developer productivity are really talking about, is like, you might feel efficient, but are you actually efficient?
Change is hard.
Yeah.
They're still cobbling those make scripts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Tara, I want to know about your t-shirt. Tell us about your t-shirt.
There we go. Sorry. It's so Women Who Code is an
when you're being excited, we can see it.
Yes. Yeah, I should have worn my CD Foundation t-shirt, but I have.
I want to hear about Women Who Code.
Great organization.
So, yeah, this is a great organization. I've been associated with it to varying degrees since about 2014. It's been around since about 2012. So I guess, this is the 10-year anniversary. Started out, it was founded by a couple of women, one who is now the CEO, Elena Percival, and this organization was about building a strong community of enabling women to support each other to have successful tech careers.
Nice.
It is oriented around technical topics, but not exclusively slow. We've got project managers and product managers and that type of thing who are also participants. And it has, particularly since pandemic, when everything kind of got upended, there's now hundreds of thousands of members worldwide supporting each other through ongoing learning opportunities, mentor programs, what they call what do they call it? There's the local networks, and again, worldwide. One of the fastest growing is in Colombia, for example.
Wow.
Huge tech in LATAM, and Nairobi in Africa, also huge emerging tech communities.
Something good always comes out of crap. And
Yeah.
the pandemic sucked, but there's so many of these organizations that have formed and grown because people were sitting in front of their computers and they wanted to change what they were doing. I have
Yeah.
a child, it wasn't in tech, but she completely reinvented herself because she didn't have a choice during the pandemic, and now she's thriving. So it's really cool to see all these like girls who code and women who code, and trying to get my granddaughter involved because she wants to learn how to code. And she's 13, and so we're trying to find a program here. She doesn't like to listen to grandpa very much, who's very good at it, but I think
Well, I think finding
important.
your tribe is important, and a lot of the really successful communities within Women Who Code are around either career transitioners or returnees. Women Who Code had a great a partnership with VMware, the Tara, not Tara, my Tara, but Tara, TAARA program in India that I think the goal was to return 15,000 women who might have stepped back from tech careers because of, parenthood or other personal reasons, how to get them back into high tech, and it's been enormously successful. And it's so important that we really sort of demystify tech as a career choice for anyone, not just women, but for anyone, because there are never enough people for the roles. Even in as you said, your daughter was doing something else and is now in tech. Tech is always hiring. And tech can be done remotely, which, and now we have shown through pandemic that it can be truly done remotely. And the more that we can build an awareness of anybody can get into tech, including me, who never should have been in tech. I should have been a history professor somewhere. We can be in tech and we can be successful and we can change the world. We're changing the world all the time.
What kind of age group does women encompass that word? Is it college, high school?
No, it's adult. It's
adults.
It's you could certainly, there's no restrictions. Right. But I think that the target demographics are maybe towards the end of college, but more post-college.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, there's other organizations that are younger. I was actually part of one called Chick Tech, which I hate the name, but which was targeting actually middle school and young high school girls who might not consider STEM at all as a future possibility. So actually it would have been targeted people like me at the same age. So that was really fun too. But yeah, there are a lot of organizations out there.
And you're the CEO. The CEO is, I've heard her speak before. She's super dynamic. Maybe you can make an intro and she could be one of our guests.
I think that would be amazing. I would be happy to do that.
Rebecca, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say now, Tara, because I've noticed that you mentioned it earlier that you started out in 1993 and you've been through several changes throughout in the industry. What is the biggest change that you're hoping to see in the next few years to come in this industry, and how it will affect women coming into this industry and minorities, just everybody overall?
For the next few years?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Well, let's go back to an earlier premise, which is change is hard, and it happens slowly. I was talking about this at Women Tech Makers back in 2019, where when I was in school at the time, about 40-45% of the students in CS programs were women, and around 30-35, somewhere in there, percent of high-tech industry, which at the time was much smaller than it is now, but at the time were women, maybe as much as 40%. And also women in technical roles, not just, HR, sales, marketing, that kind of stuff. But then you fast forward to the early 2000s after the first tech crash and also the emergence of programming culture, you saw that drop enormously, both in women and also people of color. And we're only now getting back to the pre-crash numbers from a demographic perspective, at least in the United States. And
What caused
so, what's that?
What caused that drop?
Well, I think it was a combination of that big crash in 2001, right? And, you know, I was hit by that crash. I was 7 million on paper once, you know, we went IPO and I was like, I'm rich. And then, you know, month 4 of the 6-month employee blackout, oh, well, bye. That was a whole bunch of zeros just disappeared. Anyway, yeah, I think that the industry changed. It got a lot faster, more aggressive, you know, a lot of, and we still see it to this day where we have people who are very charismatic and could be selling you BS, but they can get VC funding because of who they are, right? It rhymes with
Tracy's just going, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, okay, you know, can I say this? Like, I mean, let me just say this and you can edit it out if you need to, but like, I think we all threw up in our mouths a little bit when we saw Andreessen Horowitz giving, you know, $500 million to Adam Newen, right? Like, what was that all about? So you know, what do I see in the near term? I think the foundation has been laid. I don't know how fast it will happen, but you have VCs that are either run by women and people of color or focus on opportunities for founders who are women and people of color. And we're starting to see some successes. That is one thing that is huge. And then also, again, for organizations like Women Who Code or Code 2040, which is a university-oriented organization to get people of color better landings into internship programs and then subsequently, you know, hired into full-time positions. You know, as the demographics change, we're also putting through things like developer productivity, understanding the impact of culture on business success, the understanding of heterogeneous employee bases on financial success. There's, you know, Boston Consulting and McKinsey have been producing, and Harvard Business been producing reports for years that an all-white male industry is not as successful as one that is not, right? And so that I think the momentum is building, and it's slow and we're going to backslide, but that is evolving. And I think that's super powerful. And then beyond that, I think the power of cloud computing for all the things that it can do ill and for all the problems that you can have, like, you know, the cloud vendors make it really easy for all of a sudden you have a $15,000 credit card bill that you weren't expecting. That's a whole nother problem. But, you know, you no longer have to go into, you know, max out your credit cards, buy all the hardware at Fry's and then borrow some lady's garage to found a new company. Right. You can pay for resources by the second and code on your smartphone and take an idea to market. And I think that also is a fascinating evolution of how we think about technical innovation and the opportunities that it have. And then the final thing that I think, we used to make the joke that every company is a healthcare company because, you know, figuring out how to do healthcare for your employees was considered a really hard challenge, but everybody had to do it, right? Now every company is a tech company, right? Oh, yeah. And so you don't, you know, working at Google, Google is a big company, or Microsoft or Amazon, but let me tell you, there's companies that are bigger, like financial institutions that have more technical employees than any of the FANG companies do. But we don't really think about them necessarily as tech companies. Right. But they're using tech because tech is now becoming a common language. Well, you know, all the companies, you know, my tiny little town here, everybody's got a website, everybody can do order online, everybody's got a payment system that requires somebody somewhere to be doing technical work on their behalf. It is now pervasive.
Yeah, so and you have to add the whole level of cybersecurity that has to be wound into every single, even in my own house, right? I have to have a level of protection for my company because I'm doing stuff that can impact. And it's amazing though, to think about being able to code on your phone, you know, to be able to do things that you could never think of doing in the past because you don't need all that extra hardware.
Absolutely. So you know, tech is part of our human existence now, for good or ill. So, you know, those of us who are in tech and are in positions of leadership, as much as possible, it's part of our responsibility. And this sounds a little goofy, but I believe it firmly. It's part of our responsibility. Like, what are we enabling, right? And what are we enabling for the positive? We have to be thoughtful about that. And you could look at like the whole Cloudflare fiasco. You can't be neutral, truly. Being neutral is actually picking a side, right?
Right, right.
And so it's important, but you can also point at some truly amazing things that happened. The Arab Spring and people putting the Google DNS servers as graffiti because they were trying to shut down the internet in the companies or in those countries. Like, that's powerful, right? But it can also be used for, stalking and God only knows what, right? So it's tech, and I guess another way of looking at it is tech is taking all of our humanness and putting it on steroids. So the amazing things are that much more amazing, and maybe the not amazing, negative things are that much worse.
Oh, wow. Well, we got to wrap up here. I can't believe we've been going for 45.
Oh my goodness.
I know, but that was an amazing place to land. And I really appreciate that. You guys agree? That was a great place. I was going to ask you to kind of sum it up, but you did it without any prompting. So we are so excited that you were here. This is the first time the three of us have kind of kicked off and relaunched this show. So you were an amazing guest for us.
Oh gosh, thank you.
We really appreciate you being here. Tracy, Rebecca, you guys have anything you want to say here to wrap up before we go today?
No, I just want to say the absolute thank you to Tara for being here and sharing her background and her experience, because it really does tell a story, not just about Tara. I mean, a lot of the things you talked about, I'm surprised we didn't meet before CD Foundation, to be quite honest. But it's a journey that we've taken in DevOps, and it was a really, really fascinating view of what that journey looks like and where we're going.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Tara. It was a pleasure.
Well, hopefully one of these days we can all get together in person and have a couple of drinks and keep talking about, solving the world's tech problems.
You bet. Well, thank you so much, Tara. And thanks for everybody who tuned in today. Look forward to seeing you all on our next Techstrong Women episode. Thanks. Have a good one.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hey everyone, happy Thursday. Cody J. Brown here with some programs happening next week at Techstrong Learning. So on Monday, we've got a loan program starting at 1 p.m. Eastern. Security Boulevard hosts a roundtable on cloud security. Our panel will discuss the ever-growing complexities of cloud management, why guardrails for security are observed, and the increasing rate at which secure apps can be developed and deployed. Join us back Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern for Accelerating and Securing Argo CD Software Deliveries at Scale. OpsMX explores the challenges and solutions modern enterprises face when scaling continuous delivery and open source tools that can be implemented to automate software deliveries. My final program for you takes place on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. StormForge brings you auto-scaling Kubernetes applications with continuous optimization. Industry experts will explain the Kubernetes auto-scaling challenge and why some organizations are leaving cost savings on the table. This is a panel I do not think you'll want to miss. But that is all I've got for you right now. We do have more upcoming programs next week, and if you just can't wait until then, take a look through our on-demand programs at devops.com/webinars, and just be sure you are looking in the on-demand section. Everyone, have a great weekend.
The Engineering the Change Scholarship Program offers a life-changing opportunity for a winner from an underrepresented community to change their lives by becoming a full-stack software developer.
The background that you might see that it's a weakness, it's a strength in this field because everyone is constantly looking for people that are going to bring new ideas.
It's an intense 12-week course that is not for the timid.
For real, who's mastering this right now? Because I sure am not.
So you guys are badass. Like as a class, you guys are crushing it.
You've got to be dedicated. You've got to be ready to do it. Your life has to be ready for it. Follow us as we go through this cohort's Engineering the Change winner on their journey to becoming full-stack engineers.
Say with great power comes great responsibility.
We got to take it down to 3 finalists. Toria, I'm going to ask you, who really kind of stood out for you?
The 3 people that stood out to me the most was Stephanie and another woman named Carly and a man named Donald.
Mitchell, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree. Actually, I think those are 3 great candidates, and I mean, you know very well, right, what it takes to go through this process.
Look, I still love good written and oral skills. I like people who can speak well. I like people who really can write well.
All right.
And I'm going to tell you something. To your point about Stephanie, is it Stephanie Sanchez? Yeah, Stephanie Sanchez. Her essay was one of the best essays I've ever read in the 3 or 4 times we've done this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And bring her into
the golden
finals.
buzzer. Right?
So,
she's in.
Yeah. The 2 other people you mentioned, to me, Carly epitomizes why we do this.
Yeah.
She said something like, her brothers could do it, why couldn't she? Mm-hmm. Right? Wasn't that in the essay?
Yeah.
And
That's something that stuck with me, especially as a woman.
Yeah.
Because I think that for her, she was like, if they can do it and there's not enough women in tech, like she was like, I can do it too. And I love that.
I say send Carly to Hollywood.
Golden buzzer.
Yeah. Donald Bazell, really nice guy. What I liked about his essay is his genuineness. Is that a word?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
being genuine.
He's genuine.
Yeah.
Right? You got it from him. My only caveat on this is he really doesn't have any tech experience.
Yeah.
So if it's your vote and Mitchell, you don't object, I say let's give Donald the last ticket to Hollywood. And those are our 3 finalists for Engineering the Change. Let's bring them in for interviews and pick our winner.
Okay.
Sounds fun.
Sounds
All
good.
right. We'll see you on the next show.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
I have the great pleasure of being joined by Dave Wright. Dave is Chief Innovation Officer with ServiceNow. Hey, Dave, good to be talking with you.
Hey, Mitch. Thanks for taking the time and having me on.
Welcome, welcome. Well, we have some exciting stuff we want to get to, some news. But first, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, and for the few people on the planet who might not know who ServiceNow is, maybe give us a brief on ServiceNow.
Yeah, so my name's Dave Wright. As you said, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for ServiceNow. So I've been here for coming on for 11 years now. And for people who don't know who ServiceNow is, what ServiceNow is all about is making the world of work better for people. It's about looking at all the complexity that happens on an enterprise level when people are trying to get work done, and looking at how you can simplify that. So looking at how you can make things easier for employees, how you can make things easier for customers, and how you can make things easier for your business as well.
Fantastic. Well, I'll let you make the announcement. Tell us about the new news.
Okay, so what we're announcing today is the release of our Tokyo release. So we name all our instances after cities. We do 2 releases a year. So earlier in the year we had San Diego, but now we're doing the Tokyo release. And the interesting thing for me about the Tokyo release is we're very customer focused. So we look at what's happening with our customers and get feedback from them and look at how we address some of the concerns and the needs that they've got. And I spend a huge amount of time talking to customers. But over the last 2 years, I suppose, as I've spoken to people, there's more and more trends that have emerged. And those trends are kind of uniform, but it doesn't really matter what the industry is. I tend to find people have the same type of issues. So now I'm still hearing people talking quite a lot about how do they not just attract talent into an organization, but how do they retain talent within an organization? Mm-hmm. And that's become different to what it used to be, especially if I look at my world in kind of California and Silicon Valley. The whole concept around how you keep an employee used to be you'd make it so that they'd never want to leave work. You'd make it so that they had everything they possibly needed in that work environment. But now with this new way of working, with this more distributed hybrid working model, you need something else to do that. You need to focus much more on experience. The next thing I find comes up quite often is people are concerned around both the rising cost of things that we see with inflation currently the way it is, and also with how do people get supply chain resiliency and deal with supply chain issues? How do they get something to the point where they're not going to be affected by that again? And then the other common elements, the final common elements that come up are people focusing on business operations. So people are seeing more and more increased complexity. They're seeing more and more regulation. They're seeing this focus on compliance. How do they deal with that? And how do they get that visibility to make sure that they can cover all those areas off? So the Tokyo release is very focused on addressing some of those problems.
Excellent. Well, I definitely concur with those trends. I think that those would be broadly shared things. And I would just kind of tweak a little bit, add a little bit to the supply chain. I think it's also expect further disruption, right? Because there's all onshoring and, the batteries in my car have to be made in the US now. Okay, how's that going to happen? Or whatever industry you're in. I think everybody's being affected by sort of kind of localization, if you will, within different economies, countries. And it's an interesting time, isn't it?
Well, that's what I think took everyone by surprise, especially the supply chain side. I don't think anyone was suddenly prepared to have a whole group of suppliers just say, yeah, we haven't got any more of that, or we can't get it for a few months.
We're not in that business anymore, or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And no one wants to be kind of fenced in like that anymore. So people looking at how do I have alternatives that enable me to always be able to go to different suppliers to get what I need and be able to have that insight into when I'm going to have any issues.
So those are fairly macro kind of things. How does that translate into Tokyo and the things that you've done in this release?
So I suppose at some level, if you look at the platform on its own, there's a lot of ways that we kind of address various areas of that. So we optimize processes to help people to do the best work. So that's kind of a core function of what we do with the workflow side of the product, but also what we've done with the new UI side, the experience side. So we first released what we call the Next Experience in the San Diego release, but we've enhanced it more as we've gone through the Tokyo release. And then we start to look at how we connect that data together and start to create some of those more seamless experiences across employees. And then finally, because of the nature of the platform, we allow people to kind of accelerate innovation, but accelerate innovation in a way where they can do it at scale. So what we've done is we've kind of looked at the different products that we could create and how they get put together, and we've sort of grouped the products together. So what we've done is we've looked at 3 areas where we say, well, how can we affect these areas? We've looked at what can we do to boost engagement and productivity and get better customer and employee experiences. We've looked at how we can supercharge what we do from an intelligence perspective, and how can we start to get trust for operations and security. And finally, the last one, when we talked about accelerating innovation before, is how can we actually also help accelerate value by providing some solutions that we didn't have before. So that's the way we group them. If you want, I can talk a little bit about what's in each of those areas.
I'd love to hear about that too, and just maybe if you would think about this too. My own experience is, there's been a lot of sort of automation that we focused on through COVID and other reasons, but there's also a re-engineering of those processes too. It's not just continuous improvement and making things incrementally better. I can count on probably 2 hands how many times we've had to rebuild, redesign processes as business conditions, customer offerings, doing new innovation. So part of it is that velocity of being able to not only create the innovation, but rebuild the systems and processes and support that people need to do that. You see the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the challenge that people have had is having that visibility into what the process actually is. Mm-hmm. So the worst thing you can do when you look at digital transformation in general is just go in and take the existing process that you've got and digitize it, because quite often you end up with a bad process that just runs a bit faster. It's an opportunity to look at how you can address those processes and think more like a digital native. There's very much a feel. A lot of processes were always designed by people who think in an analog way, and that capability to say, well, let's not just take that analog process and change it, but let's think of it how a digital native would look at that. It'd be the difference between you deciding you were going to download music onto a device as opposed to immediately thinking, well, do I need to download it? I could just stream it. So then I haven't got to worry about storage or capacity anymore. And that's kind of the difference between those 2 ways of thinking. The concept of downloading music to a device is an analog way of thinking because that's what you used to do with cassette tapes. A digital way of thinking would be, I don't even need to do that.
It's not just another format. It's a different way of having the experience, in this case, a digital experience.
Absolutely.
I'm curious your thoughts because creating new digital as an experience isn't necessarily an easy thing to rethink, right? So we kind of live in the soup that we live in, right? The world we live in and the bubble we live in. How do you help customers with thinking about it in a digital native world or redesigning it from a digital standpoint so that you're appealing to all people, folks that may be new to digital experiences, folks that may live it every day?
So I think a lot of it comes down to understanding the way expectations are being set. A lot of people talk around consumerization of the enterprise. And the interesting thing is when you look at some of the big companies that really have changed the way people do business, the people that have changed the way that we order things online or the way that we book holidays or the way that we get cars, they haven't actually come up with something that's a new concept. They've just made the experience so good that you would rather use their service than anyone else's. So I've always been able to buy things online. I've always been able to get a taxi. But now we've got companies out there that provide ways of doing that are so much easier that I tend to favor them. And I think that's what you need to think about when you actually look at putting transformation in place. You need to think about it being experience-led. And an experience to me, it isn't just that UI side, it's also being able to hide that complexity. So, when someone initiates a service, they make their choices, and they get notified when they can expect that service to be fulfilled. Everything that happens around that in the background, the workflows that sit in the system, they're the things that you shouldn't have to worry about as a consumer. And that's very much what we think about when we look at some of the new features in Tokyo, for example. So if I think of an example of that, for a while we've been able to allow people or employees to come in and go into a portal and be able to raise issues or issue requests. But what we can do now is we can say, well, is that really the way people want to work? Do people want to go in there and have a conversation with people? Do people want to go in there and raise a traditional ticket the way they would have by sending an email somewhere? And in most cases, no. If I think of how I solve my challenges in the real world, I tend to go online and find out what the problem is. So part of the Tokyo release, we have the concept of issue auto resolution, where we've been able to use natural language processing, being able to provide that virtual agent front end, that as someone has an issue, they actually go in and have the solution suggested to them or are taken to the place where they can resolve that themselves, to try and make sure that they don't lose any efficiency, that they're not waiting for replies, that they get that auto resolution in place. So focus on that experience to me is very key.
It's interesting. It's not just about being digital, but that's just being online, right? And sometimes rethinking those experiences is equipping other people, not making what we have better, right? Not a better ticketing system or a better workflow, maybe giving them part of that workflow so there isn't handoffs, so there's not delays in the process, that they actually get what they need much quicker. But it's the simple sometimes is hard, though, isn't it? Simple's not easy.
It can be, and that's why when we start to look at features and enhancements we put in the product, that's why things do change. So, like a common question that we used to get was, how do I actually go about building these processes? What steps do I go to, and when should I do certain things? And we realized that we had so many customers that were live that we could kind of build some of that automated intelligence into the system. So one of the things we came up with was this concept called Admin Center. And what people can get very confused by when they have a SaaS-based solution is am I getting all the value that I need from it? And by that, it's, am I using it in the right way? Am I doing the right things? So what Admin Center allows you to do is it allows you to visualize everything that you're entitled to, and then overlay that with how you're currently using it. So you make sure you haven't bought something and you're not optimizing what you can do with it. But the system can also look at how mature you are from a process perspective. So, how are you dealing with customer service issues? How are you dealing with IT issues? Or how are you dealing with employee requests? It can look at that system and say, well, based on how you're acting, you're at a certain level of maturity. You're probably now ready for this next stage of implementation. And that could be deploying a product that you already have in a different area, as opposed to necessarily needing a new product. This is like a guided path that shows people how they can administer and how they can develop what they do on the system, which is something that people have asked for a while. But I think this guidance and visibility kind of spreads throughout the platform now, because if I look at another product, Manager Hub, that's very focused on how do I get that holistic view of all my team. So Manager Hub allows you to visualize your team, to understand what requests they've got outstanding, to understand what career journeys they're on, to understand what promotion paths they're on, to be able to have those employees spread around, but still have that feel that you've got that team around you. So again, all that kind of referential linking of different things together.
One of the things I've enjoyed, and this is pre-Tokyo release, is the online commercials that have people talk about, I created such and so, and I'm not even a coder. Right. It's really cool. I enjoy them very much. Yeah. And I'm curious. I'm curious, how do you create a platform where, in the tech world, we might say, well, that's a low code, no code, citizen developers. We put all these wonky words around it. And the average person in the organization who can use a platform like ServiceNow, they don't even think in those terms, right? They think of, I'm a manager of people and I have to do these things.
Right.
How do you put that to them so that they're equipped? Well, at the same time, you do have to handle some more of the complexities of software and integration and those kind of challenges.
So a lot of the times it's just getting people to think in terms of service and workflow. So if I think about a specific task that I'm going to do, it's very easy for me to then break that down into processes. So it's very easy for me to say, okay, what type of work are you doing? And when people say everything they do, what they're doing then is the categorizing work. And then when someone says, well, if you get that type of work to do, who does it? They'll say which teams do it. Then you're starting to work out your links between categorization and assignments. Then you can start to deal with things like the relative importance of things, and you can build up that workflow. And what we try and do is we try and allow people to have reusable components. We try and put tools in place that allow people to be able to build those apps, to be able to visually alter what happens from a workflow perspective, and to be able to try and get people to think about things in a different way. So a good example of that was we now have a solution called supplier lifecycle management, where it kind of addresses what we were saying at the stop about how do you deal with supply chain distribution. But the process of onboarding a supplier, for example, is a very well-known process in most companies. So rather than using email and getting people to fill in forms, getting people to understand what's actually needed to be done to get the certification, to get the legal approvals, to get someone into a preferred suppliers list is something that you can automate. The way it works the best for me, in my experience, when I speak to people, is it's that combination of having subject matter experts work with people who understand basic coding. Because as you said when we were talking on the intro, Mitch, it's getting people to think like a programmer isn't necessarily what you want to do, but having someone who just understands the concept of things like if this, then that, it's very easy for that subject matter expert to then describe what happens and sit with someone who can actually start to build that out without that person being a fully qualified programmer. Just someone who's used to administering a system can easily do stuff like that.
I feel like we are in the era of what we did for spreadsheets and financial people to model things, right? Their understanding of the world. We're in a new world of think about work and process and outcome and value. And Absolutely. That's what platforms with ServiceNow are about.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. How do you make things scalable? How do you make things repeatable? How do you get visibility into what's actually happening? How do you take things that you're very familiar with and then scale them out? So everyone, for example, is very familiar with the concept of IT asset management, but all those principles can be applied to something else. So you can move that very easily, as we've done in this release, to look at what you do around enterprise asset management. How do you start to deal with things that are important to a business? So it might be you're managing servers and network switches. It might be you're managing MRIs and X-ray machines, or it might be you're managing welding robots, or it could be something that's an intrinsic large asset to the company, but it still needs maintenance to be in compliance. It still needs to be serviced. It's still got a depreciation factor. It's still got an owner. So how can we start to wrap things like that around it as well?
Excellent. So go with me for a moment, kind of a funny question. Right. You put a lot of work into a big release like this, like Tokyo. What sort of your hopes? What if you saw a customer doing something with the Tokyo release they couldn't do maybe before Tokyo, and using it in a way they would say, that's why we built it. That's exactly why we created this release. What might be an example of that comes to mind?
So I think an example, if you think of how the world's changed now, there's much greater focus on, this sounds big, but much greater focus on survival of the planet. So I speak to a lot of people now, and they have a an ESG strategy, an environmental social governance strategy. And one of the things that people have always struggled with is, if I've got all these separate initiatives running around an organization to try and do something that's better for the planet, then how do I prove the effectiveness of them? How do I understand that we're going in the right direction? So one of the things that we put into Tokyo is the concept of ESG management, where we could actually go down to a carbon accounting level to allow people to understand if their initiatives around reduced travel, or their initiatives around using energy efficient data centers, or the concepts around energy efficient buildings, what was being saved from that, and how could that actually be understood so that you knew you were moving in the right direction. And I think that's probably something that's new in Tokyo, where when I joined the company all those years ago, I never thought anyone would actually be using it to look at the impact that their company had on the planet as a whole. So that's something that we couldn't do before.
That's value with a purpose. Very much so. Well, Dave, fantastic talking with you. Congratulations on the release. Where can folks go find out more about Tokyo or about ServiceNow in general?
So Tokyo's out now. So if you go to www.servicenow.com, you'll be able to find a full list, not just of some of the features I've saw, but of all the hundreds of improvements and new features that have been added to the product.
And as a SaaS platform, it's there, ready to go, rock and roll, right?
Ready to go, all there, ready to go right now.
Okay. Thanks again, Dave Wright, Chief Innovation Officer with ServiceNow. Hope you'll come back again soon.
Absolutely, Mitch. Thanks a lot.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Craig Brandt, who is Technical Marketing Manager for the Ansible Business Unit at Red Hat. That's a mouthful right there. We're talking about automation meshes and hybrid clouds and what that all means. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
I would say most people don't even know what an automation mesh is at this point, so maybe you just walk us through what exactly is that term? We hear mesh a lot these days, but what's an automation mesh?
We do, and that's a good point and a great question. Before I get to what automation mesh is specifically, I'd just like to touch on the architecture of the Ansible automation platform, just so you get a good feel of where it fits in to the bigger picture of the automation practice. So what we've done, and this has really been based on the feedback we've received from our customers, is we've reimagined the Ansible automation platform architecture to be more distributed, to be more cloud native. And the feedback we've received from our customers is it must be easier, to be able to scale our automation. So what we've done is we've created, like I said, a cloud native method of creating, managing, and scaling your automation. So the analogy I like to use is a traffic system. So what we've done is we've used and leveraged what containers provide. And what we've done is we've created something called execution environments. What they are is basically a container that has your automation playbooks, your Ansible content with all the right dependencies you need, the right versions of those dependencies, and it's all bundled together. And the reason why we've done that is we want our customers to have a consistent experience. So throughout the automation lifecycle, you want to ensure that the content creator, the way that he wanted to execute it is actually done so when you're reaching the endpoints. And what I like to consider those as is like delivery vehicles. Then we have the automation controller. An automation controller is the control plane which has all the enterprise features you need. So think about API, think about tracing, think about logging, and think about role-based access control. That is where you define and delegate how your automation actually runs within your organization. So to me, it sounds like the traffic lights that we have in a traffic system and the stop signs and the yield signs. So it defines how you actually go, these delivery trucks will go across the highway. And the highway being automation mesh. And automation mesh is a consistent, reliable, flexible method that we use to deliver those containerized pieces of automation across the hybrid cloud. So multiple regions, think remote offices, think public cloud, think hybrid cloud, think edge. And technically, that's where automation fits into the bigger picture. But what is automation mesh itself? Well, technically, what it is a group of what we call worker nodes that have a dynamic peer-to-peer connection with each other, basically an overlay network that it dynamically builds over your existing network. So in practice, what you would do is you would actually go and install an automation mesh node or co-locate it closer to the endpoints that actually need that automation. So what that does is it localizes the automation execution, which brings a lot of advantages to technically, if you localize the actual execution, you suddenly have more resilience to high latency networks. You suddenly have more resilience to connection disruption. So if you automate execution, you want to make sure that it automates consistently, completely. Imagine a situation where you've run a piece of automation and you never get feedback if it's run successfully or it's failed. So localizing that brings a lot of advantages to organizations. Above and beyond that, think of that dynamic peer-to-peer networking. Well, that provides native resiliency into your Ansible automation platform itself. It also allows you to develop and design, I mentioned flexible, so you can create a topology of these different execution nodes for more constrained network environments. So think of a DMZ where you might have security constraints. Well, being able to put these mesh nodes and co-locate these mesh nodes really gives you the capability to ensure that you've got the security practices defined within one automation platform. It also, because of this lovely overlay network, you can reach new areas within your organization and bring automation there. What you can do is you can actually create a series of worker nodes. That means that you can run your execution even though that mesh worker node is not directly connected to the automation controller. And that has got a lot of organizational benefits.
How lightweight is that worker node? I mean, how far down at the edge can I get that to automate, and how distributed can I make that whole transition?
Well, it's also a really good question. What we are seeing with our customers is really the adoption of the hybrid cloud experience or hybrid cloud platform. So there's a proliferation of public cloud adoption, which we're seeing globally. And there's also a lot of growth into the edge environment. So what you can do with an execution node, so this is running on a Red Hat Enterprise Linux, is you can go and bring this perhaps to the near edge, right? If you can deliver the types of automation you need. So if you think about automation these days, automation is a little bit more than just streamlining a task, right? It's become the delivery mechanism for security. It's become the delivery mechanism for regulation and compliance. So the advantage that mesh provides is you can bring it a lot closer to the edge endpoint. So if you can run a RHEL machine there, you can bring the execution closer to those endpoints.
From your perspective, what has been the challenge in achieving higher levels of automation? We still see a lot of scripts out there. We see a lot of custom stuff. We see things that don't scale especially well. We've been talking about automation for a while now. What's the ultimate challenge here that people are finding difficult to overcome?
Also, a good question. And it's different markets and different industries, I believe, do have different challenges. But pervasively, some of the challenges that organizations face is they automate in islands of automation. So I'm pretty sure that most organizations, even if they don't know it, have some type of Ansible running, perhaps by an individual or within a team. But that's generally where it stays, right? It's an individual use case or it's just a team use case, and you can't get the most out of your automation if it's just running in those siloed pockets. And the difficulty or the complexity that organizations actually experience is the questions they need to ask is, how do I elevate that automation to a bigger team? How do I extend that to a multiple team so you're getting more output from your automation investments? And the issue is there will be multiple platforms perhaps running in the organization, or they won't have the enterprise features that it needs. So all the automation needs to be run securely. You need to have role-based access control. You need to have an API to integrate your other enterprise systems. And you need to be able to have that supported. And that's really where you need a platform to do so. And that's where the Ansible automation platform can really help elevate that, because it's not just a single tool that's going to help an organization get there, but it's elevating the automation so it can tackle more deeper, harder use cases that you can really leverage automation throughout the organization. And also, it needs to be easy to scale. As teams are adopting the cloud and the edge too, they can't wait for automation to get there. I use the example of a project team that are starting a new project on a public cloud. Now, they can't really wait for you to deliver the automation there, right? They are going to go, what they're going to do is they're going to pull out their personal credit card and they're going to swipe it and they're going to start shadow IT, which could be very risky for the organization. So being able to deliver automation with velocity is important. And that's really one of the strengths of Automation Mesh, because it's centrally managed through Automation Controller, and it has a far less operational overhead involved to actually go and extend that automation to that team in the public cloud.
Do you think that the current downturn in the economy will drive people to investigate automation at scale more aggressively? Because frankly, we're just shorthanded everywhere and there's no cavalry coming over the hill and I can't throw bodies at everything anymore.
Absolutely correct. Automation is now an imperative. A few years ago, automation was perhaps just an option, but it's become so much more to organizations. As we experienced the pandemic with COVID-19, suddenly you had different remote offices and people working remotely, and you had security teams and infrastructure teams trying to cope with this, right? So automation has been the accelerator to be able to change into this more hybrid model of working itself. And it's important as well, we're talking about the staffing and retention of staff is something we hear from our customers too, is to retain staff, you need to give them the tools and the capabilities to explore new, more creative ways of delivering those services. And that's really where automation can play a big role in this. So as we're trying to get more from what we do and amplify the subject matter experts that we have and the impact that they have on our business, automation has become the vehicle to do so.
It seems to me, at least, that we have more platforms than ever. The IT environment's more distributed than ever. And developers are driving much of that because they'll pick a workload in the platform. But not enough people seem to be taking a minute to look at the total cost of that, because every time I add a new platform, I got to add a whole new IT team to manage it and get the specialists to deal with that. So are we on a path to maybe figuring out how to unify the management of all these platforms in a way that might actually reduce the total cost of IT that Nobody's talking about it, but it's the ugly little secret is that it gets more expensive every time you add a new cloud or a new edge computing platform.
Absolutely correct, and it's there's an organizational component to it too. Is you need your teams to be able to have the processes to work together. But what some more silo teams are doing is they investing in those native tooling the whole time, and the more investment they have, the more opportunity they're losing of actually getting the most out of their automation running together. So you need a more pervasive language like Ansible that can span all these different IT regions. You need a language that can be easily used and expanded when you're adopting the public cloud too. So it's a lot of, from a cost perspective, from understanding the business impact perspective, that's really the goal you've got to aim for. Is the return on investment from your automation is directly related to how much volume you can push through your automation platform. So elevating appliance-centric type automation where you're just working in a certain vendor or a certain domain, such as just the networking, you want to really extend above that, and you want to start automating processes, right? Linking to business objectives. And you want to be able to link these all together into workflows, right? And also being able to define your compliance, your regulations, policy as code is also a new topic that we're starting to hear from our customers, and elevating that into more of a process automation. So that's really where you've got to aim for as an organization.
As we go along, are we also going to converge functions and roles? Because we can use something like Ansible to manage the infrastructure, the networking, certain parts of the application layer at the very least. So will we see more, for lack of a better phrase, super administrators or super DevOps teams capable of managing more up and down the stack rather than having a horizontal specialist for every little thing?
We are getting to that point, and what we are seeing is the services or the domain skills is something that is usually very niche or specific to that specific domain itself. So you'll have the networking experts, you'll have the security experts, you'll have people trying to bring this all together in a DevOps practice. And what we really need to try and do and trying to aim for is being able to codify those expertise in a method that is shareable across the different teams too, so everybody can take advantage of it. IT is complex, and it's by no mistake of anybody that there's niche domains, right? It's very complex, so you can become an expert in perhaps one or two of these domains. What automation does, and what using Ansible automation platform provides, is that capability to actually codify your services. And you mentioned DevOps. You want to be able to present those services in a self-service manner, with the compliance built in, with the regulations built in, that provide that's going to make it a lot smoother to deliver the services, perhaps through a CI/CD pipeline. And where Mesh is really cool with this too is, if you look at the investment of time, effort, people, skills that you put into a DevOps practice, Ansible automation platform, the language itself, and the capabilities of Mesh delivering these services to new remote areas, into the edge, into the public cloud, really expands and amplifies the benefits you can get from your DevOps investments.
All right, folks, you heard it here first. Automation is a good thing. Islands of automation across a lot of diverse different platforms, not so much. Hey, Craig, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Phil Nash, who's a developer over at SonarSource and somewhat famous in the C++ world since he's one of the original developers of the framework. And we were talking about a new animal in the zoo. It's called Carbon. It's a programming language being advanced by Google, but there's some confusion as to the relationship between the two that Phil's going to sort out for us. So, Phil, where does Carbon fit alongside C++? Replacement or extension?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I think that's the first thing that most people get wrong when they first hear about Carbon. It sounds like it's a new language. It's meant to play in the same space as C++ and take over from it, much like Rust and other languages that have come and gone. But actually, it's classed as a successor language, and that's a little bit different. And it means that the number one feature is interoperability, seamless interoperability both ways with the language and the ecosystem that it's effectively replacing. So much the same way that C++ itself was a successor to C, and Swift is a successor to Objective-C. So that interoperability is really the number one feature.
And what is the problem Carbon's trying to solve exactly? Why do we need another language per se?
Yeah, and other languages are here to solve similar problems, but internally within the C++ standards committee that I've been a member of for the last few years, we spent a long time trying to make C++ better, and we are, of course, but we're constrained by backwards compatibility with earlier versions. So we've got decades of technical debt built up, even since before C++, because we inherited it from C. So we haven't been able to sort that out, because one of the design goals of C++ is maintaining that backwards compatibility. So it really puts constraints on what can actually change. And more recently, there have been attempts to introduce some sort of like versioning system within the language or library level that will allow us to make more breaking changes. They haven't panned out. So many of us within the committee have said, well, what else can we do? Do we need to look outside to another language? And that's really what Carbon is trying to solve.
How hard is it to learn Carbon if you know C++? I mean, is it a derivative, or is it really a whole new language?
It's somewhere between the two. It's directly compatible with C++. So many of the things that other people may find a little bit unusual about the language will be fairly familiar to C++ developers. But the syntax overall looks a lot more modern, more like Rust or Swift, Kotlin, any of those sort of modern languages. People from those backgrounds will also be familiar with the syntax, and we'll just have to get used to the idiosyncrasies that it inherits from C++.
Do you think this will create some operational overhead that needs to be navigated as people try to figure out what's built in Carbon, what's built in C++, and there's going to be different languages at different times, because nothing ever goes away completely, right?
Right, yeah, and I wouldn't say that there's not going to be any issues at all. There always will be some disruption. But because of that central design goal of seamless interoperability with C++, you can take an existing legacy C++ code base, perhaps with millions of lines of code built up over 10, 20, 30 years, and then just start introducing bits of Carbon in there. You don't have to throw anything away. It just works straight alongside it. And eventually you might have bigger and bigger pools of Carbon, and it will just grow with you. That's the idea. It's early days, but we'll see how that pans out. But that's definitely the design goal, to be able to just seamlessly grow Carbon code out of an existing C++ code base.
C++, of course, has been around for a while. Are we seeing new use cases for that programming language, as, say, we put more stuff out at the edge, where there seems to be a greater appreciation for using compute resources more efficiently? Are we going to see a renaissance of C++/Carbon?
That's an excellent way to put it, because in fact we've seen the renaissance of C++. It happened in the mid 2010s. So there was a long period between C++ 98 and then the next standard was C++ 11. And that was during that time that people were saying, yeah, C++, it's a dead language. It's going the way of COBOL. It's never going to be updated. And the C++ 11 just changed all that. Really made it a much more modern language with modern features. And that spurred a renaissance of interest in the language. And I've seen a lot of newer, younger developers getting interested in the language, because it remains this almost perfect balancing between very low-level access. It's a systems language. You can do literally everything in it, but it has high-level abstractions, which allow you to reason about things at a much more at a high-level, everyday level. And that's different to, say, C, which just remains low-level, and that's about it.
So what's your best advice to folks as they kind of look at this situation and they're trying to navigate it? Do I just experiment as I go along, or is there some set of best practices for bringing these two things together so that the technical debt doesn't kill us all?
Yeah. So if you're not already using C++, then it may not be for you. There's not anything particularly compelling about it over something like Rust, say, if you want to get into a new language. I would actually maybe look at Rust first, because the differentiating feature is the compatibility with C++. If you're already with a large C++ code base, I'll definitely keep an eye on Carbon. It's not the only player in this space. There are a couple of others that are maybe even slightly further behind on the curve. We'll hear more about them in the next year or two, I imagine. I think the thing that's fair to say is people are very interested in seeing what comes after C++, how we can get beyond that technical debt, because it's starting to really hold us back in some respects. So if you're in that, if that sounds familiar to you, that problem, then Carbon is one to watch.
All right. Programming languages never go away. They're always with us in some form or another. Just how we continue to extend them. Phil, thanks for being on the show.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, we're back here. We're at Yalla DevOps at the Hilton Tel Aviv. It's been an amazing day, 700 people. We've had some great sessions, some great speakers. Let me introduce you to my next guest here. He happens to be a speaker at Yalla this year, Hagai Philip Zaguri, and he is with Tikal Knowledge. I almost got it to the last word.
Yeah.
And I'm going to call him Philip, just so you understand, but his name is Hagai Philip. So, sorry, Philip, talk to us a little bit. What were you speaking at Yalla DevOps?
Well, actually, it's pretty obvious today, but platform engineering, which is something that's building up.
Front and center here.
Yeah, I mean, again, if we look at JFrog as one of their products is the JFrog platform.
Yep.
But actually, if we look around, every company, open source or not, are building some kind of internal developer platform. This means for us as engineers, there's maybe a new way of calling what we're doing, like the infra team that we used to have.
Mm-hmm.
There's now platform engineering in a way.
Yes, it is.
So it's basically a lot of tools that we've been building, throughout the years. So that was my main.
So it's funny. The last person I was speaking to was from Nice. Nice, the company
I know him.
here.
I forget his name.
Or wasn't it Or?
Yeah.
No, maybe it was Or. In any event, this is something we're seeing with the evolution and maturity of DevOps. Right? It's one thing. Look, if you got a big, like an enterprise, a big company, and you have a small team that's adopting DevOps, 12 people. The typical, right? The Spotify, Amazon model, 2 pizzas, right? A 2-pizza team. You really don't need to worry about a platform per se, because they're using a few tools.
No, but I think that if you look at, GitHub Actions and GitLab, so there are platforms for those two pizza teams.
But what's happened in real life is that was fine 7 years ago. Now, there's a bubble here, there's a bubble there. You know, there's several bubbles in these bigger companies that you can't have 5 different platforms with 25 different tools.
Oh, that's for sure. I mean, the problem
and that's
is,
when it becomes acute. I mean, it's one thing if it's in a science experiment, truthfully.
it's not the queue. The problem is the finding, and there's a lot of companies here, you know, going for the root cause analysis, which is the real issue. And that's why we need a platform, not because, I mean, the tools that we don't have are lacking. It's just
no, it's not a question
complex.
of lacking, but it's also a question, I think, of uniformity, right? You can't. So we're just in Tel Aviv here at a small conference with relatively small conference with 700 people. They can't see because the cameras are only facing this way. Yeah. But there's maybe a dozen and a half vendors.
Yes. And they're all doing a platform.
The last time we did a count at DevOps.com, there was 700 or 800 companies in the DevOps space that were, doing, and everyone wants to be a platform.
Yeah, I mean, I go around, you know, these conferences like QCon and KubeCon and so on, and they're all talking about the same kind of things. But I think what's interesting now is if you look at Backstage, which is a Spotify open source product or platform, which is very similar to what Jenkins did about 15 years ago or 10 years ago. And I think JFrog did with Artifactory, you know, on their tools. So there's a lot of, you know, emerging open source technologies, which even for, you know, these 2 pizza teams, they can still, you know, benefit from those.
Look, we've had a few interviews here today around open source. And there's no doubt in my mind after, you know, going what I see and what I do, that open source is the lingua franca, right? The one voice, the one language that all of these platforms, if you want to call them, are talking, right? That's the language that developers want today. It's very hard without it to be non-open source.
I think the open source is a shade or, you know, this front we put behind.
It's the front door.
But behind individual contributors, which is really what's going on.
Well, but the individual, so we could talk about it, but when you say individual contributors, you're not meaning individuals, you mean companies?
No, it's a role in companies today. And there are a lot of agents. I mean, I'm a consultant for the last 15 years. I worked for a company. I don't work for a product company, but I still come to a company as a consultant, contribute to their effort, but from a technological point of view or technological aspect, and I'm not biased with their business objectives.
Right. So you're in a different role, right? Yeah. You're almost a neutral observer who your job is to help your customer, your client, by recommending what is the best tool or platform for the job for them.
Exactly.
But here's the thing, most open source projects today actually don't have a lot of code contributors. They have a lot of users, they have some people who do beta testing. Code contributors, it's
they're measured,
a small amount.
They're measured by the number of stars you get on GitHub,
right? That's exactly it.
Yeah, but
not by the people who contribute to code.
And again, if you look at these frameworks, I mean, when I'm talking about platform engineering, it's because we all have these small kits and tools that we carry around.
Yep.
No one has any IP there, okay? So a platform should really give that, you know, back to the community, and that's the new open source in my.
Well, and they do, right? And a lot of times, they're actually signing over the IP to like the Linux Foundation or CNCF or what have you.
I'm not sure. You know, again, I think that the CNCF, all these organizations all have some kind of agenda, which is fine. I mean, we got to make a living somehow. But I think if we look at, you know, the fact that a library contributed to a company, it can contribute to a dozen of companies. And again, Backstage is a good example. Jenkins, Artifactory.
But let's look at
Kubernetes.
Jenkins is now part of CDF.
I'm not sure again if the number. I mean, again, in America, everything is like large and huge. So maybe for Israeli like me, it looks like there's so many organizations. Where do I go, or do I need to choose between the CDF or the CNCF or the Linux Foundation, or can
They're all the same.
They're all the same, you know.
They're all part of the Linux Foundation.
Yeah, I know, but again, it's. But I still want. I can't go to conferences every day of the.
I do. No, I know. Hey, it's good business for me. It keeps the lights on here.
Yeah,
but
sure.
No, but all kidding aside, you know, the Linux Foundation is a very. It's a very weird. It's a foundation of foundations.
Didn't they kick out Linus just recently?
No, Linus was there. Where was I? I was in Austin at the Open Source Summit.
Yeah.
And they had Linus keynoting it.
So I'm not sure. I think he left the kernel or something. I'm not sure what.
He's not. I don't think he's as involved day to day in kernel development, but he still has, you know, that role where he's.
I think if we go back to our topic of platforms, so
you got me going on the other way.
These companies, I mean, these small projects, is why we need a platform. I mean, if I want to contribute to an open source project today, it's very hard to get into it if I don't know exactly what.
But let's go back to Jenkins, because this is a great example of it. So Jenkins was started by KK Kosik. Kosik, a friend of mine. He was chief scientist. Well, he was at Sun. Then he helped found, or he was chief scientist at CloudBees. And for a long time, Jenkins was a CloudBees.
I know KK myself, and
yeah. I mean, the good news is KK and the rest of the Jenkins community did a good job of keeping the distance between CloudBees and Jenkins.
Yes.
More
definitely.
than we've seen in other cases.
I think Kubernetes and Google is a good example, a very similar one, no?
Because Kubernetes early on was given to CNCF. So that's the real beauty of these foundations is, so I've been in open source a long time, right? So early on in open source, you had like Dr. Richard Stallman and if you ever read the book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar?
No.
Read the book.
I will.
It's a great book. It talks about the early days of open source, where it's kind of the Wild West. You know, it was like a bazaar, like a.
I'm very. I like the history of.
So read the history of it. It was, you know, it was very idealistic in terms of how it would work, right? But then what happened is we entered the next era of open source, which I call the Big Brother era. IBM, and basically what that would be is, look, a project was open sourced, but there was one company that owned it, that managed it, and that company did it for their own. I mean, you know, they gave good lip service to the community, but they did it for their own benefit. So what happened is if you were CloudBees with Jenkins, it was very hard to get JFrog or other companies to contribute real code to Jenkins because it was being done for CloudBees' benefit. Jenkins is better than others, but there are others that were even worse.
I think the plugins, the plugin interface
was a different thing, right? Because that was all third parties. But then we moved to this foundational model for open source. Eclipse Foundation, Apache Foundation, Linux Foundation, where you could have a whole bunch of vendors, commercial vendors, as well as end user organizations and end users themselves, all contributing to the same project. Prometheus is a great example.
Amazing.
Lightstep. Kubernetes. I mean, Kubernetes was started obviously by Google, but it's been with CNCF Linux Foundation now for a number of years. Look at the people contributing code.
I might not be very popular if this goes, you know, live, but Kubernetes is J2E all over again.
Yeah, it is. It could be.
It's the same pattern, and they have very good marketing. And again, it's I think they built a platform which was very similar to what Sun did with Java.
Yeah.
And then Tomcat came up and WebLogic and all those, add-ons
You may
around
see
Java.
that. So look, from my 2 cents, Kubernetes is hard. It's one of the hardest. I don't understand how.
Are you, by the way,
so
technical? I mean,
I'm technical enough to know that
you've got
Kubernetes is hard as shit, right? And the first time I was at a DockerCon in Austin, and I came back to the office. I said, everyone's going to this Kubernetes thing. I don't get it.
In November 2019, I wrote this blog post saying, what's wrong with Swarm? Why do we need Kubernetes?
Look, if we were in Las Vegas and we were making book on what was going to be the dominant orchestration tool, whatever you want to call it, for containers and what became cloud native, Kubernetes probably was a third or fourth or fifth best shot.
After
Docker
Mesos?
Swarm, Mesos, even my friends at Rancher.
Oh, Rancher, I think, is a great product.
It was a great product.
It is.
It's part of SUSE now.
No, but it's,
Yeah, but they don't have they've adopted Kubernetes. They have stuff they've built around it,
they built
K3s and stuff like that.
K3, I use this for training every day.
Yeah, no, it's a great product.
And again,
my friend Chang was the CEO, now he's VP at SUSE. But for whatever reason, the war's over, right? Kubernetes won.
Kubernetes took it, yeah, that's for sure.
So sometimes, I learned this. I was a big OS2 user. I loved OS2.
I was in the Army, and that's what we used to use, VAXs. And
it was beautiful. Much better than Windows.
Ah, that's for sure.
But here we are.
I forget the name. I forget his
OS2
name.
Warp.
No, the guy from Docker.
Solomon Hykes is Docker.
No, it's Solomon. One of these guys in the development is also a chubby guy like us. With a hat used to come. I forget his name. We were in the conference, I think with the JFrog in 2019.
I don't
together.
remember right now. Okay.
We were there. Anyway, he used to say, who's going to run, do you see a guy in McDonald's running kubectl? Do you see that happening? And I said, no way. But it's everywhere. I mean,
it is now. It's embedded.
I think McDonald's are running also.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah.
Look, they here today. We're talking about putting Kubernetes at the edge. Kubernetes running IoT devices with containers on them. So, a perfect example. But would it have been as successful if Google had kept it just as Google, not?
Do you think it's they telling us the whole story? I'm not sure.
That what?
I'm not sure that Kubernetes is the whole story.
We did a webinar, or not a webinar, roundtable on this a couple months ago. Is there post Kubernetes? What's this?
I don't know. I do this. I go to startup companies for groups of 20 and 30, and I do usually a 3 or 4 day course on Kubernetes. And one of the questions is, what's going to be in 5? What am I going to do in 5 or 10 years time from today? I have no
idea.
Maybe it will be a phone that just everything's from the phone. I have no idea what the interface is going to look like.
I don't know, but when I interviewed Tim Hawkin. So we have August 10th, we have Cloud Native, a virtual event we're doing. And in that one, I'm interviewing Tim Hawkin, who is principal engineer at Google. He was on the original Borg, which became Kubernetes.
Yeah, Borg,
right?
yeah, really, yeah.
On that team. About this question about what's the future look like. I didn't do the interview yet, so I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, so let's see.
But August 10th, you can watch it. But that is an example. But it's certainly a platform. A lot of the whole observability platforms have become.
That's why I think that we don't get the whole story. We just got a framework which does the basic stuff like deployment schemes, high availability, load balancing.
But that's again part of this model. Yeah. Is everyone starts at that even level, and then it's up to what companies do with it from there.
I agree. I mean, it's very similar. I mean, when I teach Kubernetes, I say it's like the amplifier of the kernel, really.
Yeah.
It's like bringing the kernel to the network, which is something that was hard to do in a single machine, or a VAX or OS2 or whatever, because it was just one CPU eventually. So these 4 parameters we were all running for were only these 4 parameters, which was a limited amount. And today Kubernetes just gave this, the scale.
Yeah,
and again,
that it has. if you put the time into it.
Yeah, it took us about 4 decades, right?
So now, but
yeah,
well,
till Kubernetes to become,
But when you look at the adoption of Kubernetes compared to some of the previous kinds of things, it's crazy. It's a crazy adoption curve.
It's crazy, and again, the ease of use, and because there was so much technology, so much, I call it the evolution, has come so far that even a newbie can actually adopt these technologies, and that's the big.
And that's a big. You're right. That's a big leap forward.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're about out of time.
Yeah.
Philip, for people who want to find out more about your company, where do they go?
Tikalk.com.
Say it to the camera.
TIKAL.k.com.
All right.
And we're
thank
happy
you for
to talk technology.
Thank you for being here. Thank you
pleasure.
for being at Yalla. I think that's going to wrap up our coverage at Yalla. It's been it's almost 5 o'clock. It's been a great Yalla DevOps. We're happy to be back in person. We're happy to be back in Israel. We will see you on regular Techstrong TV this week, back home in Boca Raton. Until then, I'm Alan Schimmel. We're out.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, we're back here at Yalla DevOps. It's actually still, I guess, the end of the lunch hour. So there's a din. I don't know if you could hear it. Our mics are pretty good. But there's a din of people as they're standing around having dessert, catching up. It's a great conference. It's a great day. I want to introduce you to a lady here to my right. It's Sharon. You know, we're gonna go whole name on you. Sharon Riva Zitzman.
That's right.
People call her Sharon Zitzman, whatever you want to call her. You know, a confession. I've been following her on LinkedIn for probably 5, 6, 7 years. And when I want to know what's going on in the Israeli DevOps scene, I watch her Twitter feed or her LinkedIn, because she's always either at a conference, talking to someone, shouting out a company, doing something. So it's a pleasure to have you on.
It's awesome to be here. I'm so excited to finally meet face to face.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So for those who maybe not everyone listening or watching is familiar, give them a little of your background and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So Alan and I go way back in the very early days of kickstarting the DevOps community in Israel and Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
I remember reaching out to Alan when he was running DevOps.com and seeing how we could work together and collaborate together. I've been leading the DevOps community in Israel and the cloud native and open source community for 9 years now. That's a whole 9 years. Today I'm doing developer relations as a service, and I'm working with some of the most exciting companies out of Tel Aviv. But before that, I was head of developer relations at AppsFlyer. Before that, I was at Cloudify, kickstarting the open source developer community, and all of these things enabled me and Alan to cross paths and do fun stuff together.
Absolutely. And we should, you mentioned you're doing relations as a service.
Yeah,
is that what you call it?
relations,
Yep. So you started your own company.
I did. I went rogue.
You went, well, it's not rogue. To me, it's the natural way of things, right? This is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And let's face it, it's scary a little bit,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Because you're kind of walking on a high wire without a net, and you've got to hunt your own business, and then deliver, right? So, but this is every entrepreneur. Every entrepreneur goes through this. They reach that moment where they feel, this is the time, I have to do it. So you're doing it now, Sharon, about 2-3 years?
It's about 1.5 years now.
Year and a half?
In the thick of COVID, I went for it, surprisingly.
That's the time to do it. What do you have to lose?
I was like, I'll POC this thing, and it just surprised me. But I'm very lucky and privileged to be in a very strong ecosystem of really great technology companies, developer-first companies, and being an active part of the community in Israel and Tel Aviv, the DevOps community, the cloud native. it enabled me to make these contacts way before I even kickstarted the company, and then it was just kind of a natural transition to work with all of these companies that I know from the ecosystem and kind of help them get in front of like the developer communities that they want to tap into. So.
Yep. So that brings us here to Yalla. We're here at Yalla DevOps. This is the third Yalla DevOps.
Amazing.
I wasn't last year, obviously, because of COVID, but I was at the first one. This one is
fantastic. Fantastic. I mean, it's grown
exponentially bigger, right? There's Shlomi told me there's 700 people registered. They actually closed registration. It was sold out.
Yeah.
And it's a testament to the community.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
This is not an event where people are flying in from Europe or North America for the most part. This is the local Israeli
community.
DevOps developer community. It's strong, it's vibrant. I think they're calling people in for the sessions.
So
what do you think about it?
I think it's incredible. So I've obviously been leading DevOps Days Tel Aviv since its onset in 2013. Our first event was like 200 or 250 people, and now Yalla DevOps, which is another kind of conference, and all of the vendor conferences like AWS Summit and Google Cloud and Microsoft Build, and every single year you just see them growing exponentially. In COVID, when we did DevOps Days Tel Aviv in 2021, I capped it also at about 800 attendees because of COVID and all of that, and we were also sold out. And just the community, and what I love about this DevOps community is that we all collaborate. So at Yalla DevOps, we're friendly, we work together. This is the Hebrew version of, I guess, DevOps Days Tel Aviv. DevOps Days Tel Aviv, we try to have our content be in English, and this is like kind of for the local community in Hebrew. And it's incredible to see how much buy-in and how much excitement there is for all of the DevOps and cloud and open source related events in Tel Aviv. People just come out strong. One of the things that people enjoy most is this hallway track and meeting up with their friends and being able to network and knowing that awesome people are going to be around that they can talk to, that they can learn from. And that's the amazing part of community. That's what I love about community.
And so we did a lot of virtual events during COVID. Yeah. And no matter how great your speakers are, no matter what your sessions are like, that's the thing that you really, there's chat. It's not the same. We can't create this hallway track in virtual. And that's what brings people out.
Yeah.
They can watch presentations. God knows we have enough presentations on the internet.
And JFrog have been doing an amazing job of fostering community for years. They did the whole Jenkins community in Tel Aviv for a very long time before they transitioned into Yalla DevOps, and we were always very collaborative around open source stuff and CI/CD and DevOps.
Yeah.
They've always been first-class open source citizens, JFrog.
They have. JFrog certainly has. But the Israeli developer community has always been, open source is in many ways the calories that the developer community burns for energy.
You can see just from the speakers at this event, and some of them are even my clients, you can see, their investment in open source. You can take a look at like Commodore with their Valid Cube that they contributed back to the community, which aggregates a bunch of really great Kubernetes open source projects into a single platform. Firefly that are speaking, they did Valid Yak, they forked their Valid Cube, and they orchestrate infrastructure as code related open source projects. JIT, we're speaking, and they're talking about how they orchestrate open source security tools, and Tree with their open source CLI, and Kubescape from Armosec, and all of these excellent open source projects, and Slim AI, who actually couldn't make it out, and their Docker Slim project. And I am rejuvenated, reinforced by like the newfound commitment to open source. Because I was really worried about the open source ecosystem a few years ago, when everything was changing and the licensing was changing, and I was scared that like kind of this whole open source like collaborative world would kind of crumble because of everything that was happening. And I'm seeing newfound faith and investment in open source, and it's amazing. It really is.
So I will tell you, now that COVID is what it is, it's not a way, but it is what it is. I travel more, and I think the energy level around open source has never been higher.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I was at KubeCon in Valencia. I was at the Open Source Summit from the
I had a lot of FOMO not going to both of those, but hopefully I'll get myself out to the next one.
Well, the next one is in Detroit.
I know. I've never been to Detroit. I'll be honest.
Either. I'm on it. I've never
I'm
been
a
there
Philly
either.
girl. I've never been to Detroit.
No, I've never been to Detroit, but we're looking forward to that. And then in Europe next year is Amsterdam.
That's fun. It's a great city.
You know, there's so much. I mean, I'm working. I'll talk to you about it offline. I'm working with a partner of ours who's based in India, who's putting on DevOps Asian Summit in Singapore in February, and also very open source theme because India is also not only India. Look, open source is worldwide. Asia is very. I mean, if it's not open source there, they don't use it basically.
Yeah. It's the new. I mean, open source is powering the world. That's just what's happening. People want to experience, and they want to see the packages working in production before they're paying, and there's no shelfware anymore.
Well,
if you don't have an open source theme and an open source direction, then you're kind of missing the market.
It's also changed the sales model, right?
Completely.
So when I was starting companies, I'd have to hire very expensive let me quote, very expensive salespeople. Now you hire developer relations people, DevRel. You hire evangelists. And their job is just to get these developers to try the software. Doesn't cost nothing. Try the software.
Adoption first.
Right?
Exactly.
If you like it, you can pay for it. If you're going to use it in such a way that it makes sense to pay for it. If you want to use it for free for what the free version does, that's fine too. Right? So you've got these advocates. Sharon, you mentioned some of the companies you're working with.
Yeah.
Let's go through them again for our audience. So these are companies that Sharon works with. And take a look at.
So there are so many exciting developer-first companies coming out of Tel Aviv all the time. So Commodore and Firefly and JIT and Slim AI and Armosec and Diversion, who are trying to build a Git replacement tool, and so many super exciting companies. It's just fun to watch. It's fun to work with them. Each one has Treeverse, open source Lake FS, if we're talking open source. And there's just so much exciting technology. If it's Kubernetes first, if it's Git replacement tools, if it's an open source data lake and Git repository, and so many exciting things. And you should really be watching the Tel Aviv market if you haven't been.
Yeah. Well, we do, but I can't talk for everyone out here. You know, another thing we're seeing at Yalla this year is sort of this. It's not that the cloud is old, but we're now saying, hey, we need to look at the edge. We need to look at IoT. And it's adding another layer, if you will, onto the developer, their job function, if you will.
Yeah.
It's not enough just to develop in Java. It's not enough to develop for the cloud. You got to start thinking, how am I developing for the edge? How am I developing for connected devices? Things.
Absolutely. So Israel is a very, kind of security-oriented company because, and the mother of all invention is necessity, right?
Yes.
So there are a bunch of exciting, like IoT security companies. Like one of them spoke in the keynote panel, Sternum, and there's Reposify and a bunch of others. And IoT is, it's gaining momentum. A lot of exciting tech coming out of.
I think the biggest IoT security company I know is they're Israeli, from Insight with an A, and I forgot their name now. I interview them all the time. Big company. It'll come to me after I'm done interviewing. It'll come to me. Anyway, yes, Israel is been way out in front with that.
If there's a technology, somebody in Israel is building something exciting around it.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about DevOps Days Tel Aviv.
Yes.
So what's current plans right now?
DevOps Days Tel Aviv is happening at Expo Tel Aviv on December 14th, 15th, the week before Hanukkah. We always do it that way, so we can have some donuts at the happy hour.
That's always good. Just what I need, more donuts.
It's going to be great. It's going to be a 2-day festival of celebrating DevOps. It's going to be co-located with Cloud Native and Open Source Tel Aviv.
Oh, okay.
So really...
So is there a cap on attendance this year, or are you going all out?
We're going big. We're going big. We're going big or go home.
What are you expecting?
I'm expecting at least 1,000 attendees, if not more. We capped the previous one at 800, and we were sold out, and we had a bunch of folks on the wait list. hard to predict, but I can tell you that the last AWS summit had 9,000 attendees in Tel Aviv. So, so there is an audience, absolutely.
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind there is. So that was December 14th and 15th. Where can people get information?
tlvcommunity.dev/DevOps Days.
Love it.
Yes.
Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
It's a pleasure to see you in person.
Yes.
All right. We are.
Shalom.
Shalom. We're at Yalla. We're not
Yalla,
live,
yalla.
though, but I hope you're enjoying this. We're going to take a break. We have some more guests coming up. And do follow Sharon. Actually, Twitter handle.
Twitter handle, Share1Z. That's me.
Or on LinkedIn. If you want to stay up to date, maybe we could talk to her about giving us an Israeli update for Techstrong TV. We'll
It'll
talk to you
probably be
later.
in a selfie, right?
That's okay. All righty. We're out. We'll be right back.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had a fantastic set of interviews with some amazing industry professionals to give you the latest news. And from our airing of Techstrong Women and Engineering the Change, we had lots of great content today. We'll be back again on Monday, so we hope to see you then. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong, Techstrong.